Since the dawn of time, humanity has asked one question. Are we truly alone in the universe? Our galaxy alone holds hundreds of billions of stars. Could it really be that in all the endless vastness of space, we are the only life that exists? Or did other stars give birth to civilizations of their own? 85 BC, Earth's time. Something extraordinary happened to a boy named Emery, just 15 years old. A sharp ringing echoed inside his head as he opened his eyes. When it faded, he found himself staring up at a bright blue sky, and beyond it, a colossal castle. He froze. The structure before him dwarfed even the grandest royal palace he had ever seen, 10 times larger at least. Its spiraling towers arched into one another, painted in gleaming white stone that seemed to radiate light itself. Emery had never read of such wonders, not even in his father's vast library. But the castle was not the only strange sight. Stretching in every direction were countless youths, all about his age, marching in neat rows toward a towering purple spire. Emery's legs refused to move. His last memory was fire, ruin, and death. "Am I dead?" he whispered. "Father, where are you?" Before he could think further, a thunderous voice broke through his thoughts. "You! Move! Follow the line! Don't stop!" Emery flinched. Turning, he saw a man clad in ornate black and gold armor, a winged helmet forming a T-shaped visor over his face. The sight was so majestic that even a king's ceremonial armor paled in comparison. "I said move!" Startled, Emery stumbled into step, trailing the boy ahead of him. His lips trembled. "What is happening to me?" He had barely spoken the words when another boy beside him called out. "Hughes T." Emery glanced over, puzzled. The boy repeated in broken Latin before switching to Emery's tongue, though heavily accented. "Are you Briton?" I don't know." Emery stammered. He wasn't sure of anything. The line pressed on, all of them funneling toward the massive tower that clawed into the sky. The closer they came, the more breathtaking it became. Thousands of armored sentinels flanked the wide staircase, while at its peak, a group of gray-robed elders awaited. One stepped forward, an old man with a long beard, his presence immense. Though no taller than Emery's father, Emery felt as though he were facing a giant. The elder raised his staff, and without moving his lips, a voice thundered in every mind. "Welcome to the Magus Academy." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "You are the chosen few, selected from thousands of human worlds. Here, at the pinnacle of human ingenuity, you may grasp magic, science, and might, if you have the will." As his words fell, the purple tower shimmered with light. "For 7 days, you may study as you wish. After that, you will return to your worlds. Those who prove worthy will be called again. Those who fail will remember nothing of this place. Use your time well." The elder struck his staff, and a searing heat flared in Emery's palm. He bit back a cry as a glowing mark etched itself into his skin, a circle split by a single line. The ringing returned in his skull, then vanished. When Emery looked around, chaos and awe filled the air. Some muttered that they were dreaming. Others gawked at their palms. Then, a new voice entered his head, this time feminine. "Gather according to your class and world. Focus your mind on the symbol in your hand." Cautiously, Emery obeyed. The mark glowed, and words surfaced before his eyes. Emery, male, 15 years old. Planet 1002, Earth. Magus Academy, Class 77. It was surreal, like stepping into a dream. Nearby, the brown-haired boy from before grinned. "You too, huh? Planet 1002, Earth. Name's Julian. What's yours?" "Emery," he replied softly. Julian wasted no time. "Who else here from Earth?" Soon, 3 more joined them. A striking dark-skinned girl with black hair, a wild-looking boy with rough brown locks, and a tall youth with long hair tied in a bun. "I am Clea, from Alexandria." "Miss, sir," said the girl with quiet confidence. "Chumo," the long-haired boy added curtly. "Dongbio." Finally, the muscular boy smirked. "Thrax, a Thracian. And you, Julian, you're Roman, aren't you?" Julian lifted his chin. "That's right. From Rome." "Roman pig," Thrax spat. "Barbarian," Julian shot back. The air grew tense as the two locked eyes. Emery stood back, observing. Despite their differences, something deep within him whispered that their fates were bound together. None of them yet knew they would shape Earth's history, and one among them would rise to become Earth's 85 BC, Britain 2 days earlier. Tack, tack. Emery leaned close. Concentration etched across his face as he pressed the final carved figure into place atop the small wooden box he had been crafting for months. Guided by lessons from the family scholar, every detail of the mechanism had been shaped with care, because this gift was meant for someone very special. A soft click echoed from within. Emery's eyes widened. He turned the box in his hands, half expecting the piece to fall apart. But when he tilted it, nothing slipped loose. Slowly, he lowered the lid, and the figure descended neatly into the box. When he opened it again, it rose back up just as designed. "Phew, it worked," he whispered, wiping sweat from his brow. The candle beside him had melted nearly to nothing, wax pooling across the desk. Only then did Emery realize how late it had grown. Smiling at the thought of the ceremony tomorrow and the girl who would receive this gift, he drifted into sleep, the box clutched close. At dawn, Emery stirred. His body begged for more rest, but his eyes quickly found the box on his table, and a smile spread across his tired face. Today was important. Her coming-of-age ceremony. In the hall, he bumped into his father, Jeffrey, head of the Ambrose household. "You look half asleep, my boy," Jeffrey said with a chuckle. Yes, father," Emery muttered, scratching his head. "I know you're eager for the princess ceremony, but don't forget your training. You'll need to practice this morning before we leave at noon." When Jeffrey reached to ruffle his hair, Emery ducked away with a pout. "I'm not a child anymore. Don't worry, I'll practice." Jeffrey only laughed and pulled him into a rough embrace. "You'll always be my little boy." Training came hard. Emery slashed at the air, but his thin arms soon trembled. Within minutes, he was panting on the ground, exhausted. His frail body, an inheritance from his late mother, refused to match his ambition. Years of practice had brought little progress, but he refused to quit. He still dreamed of becoming a knight worthy of his father's pride. "Young master." Emery turned to see the family scholar waiting. His teacher since childhood, the man carried the calm authority of routine. "It's time for your lesson." Together, they walked to the library, a chamber overflowing with scrolls, parchments, and the scent of herbs stored for potion brewing. Here, Emery was far more comfortable. He had been studying architecture and crafting recently, but his favorite lessons were always his late mother's notes on herbs and potions. Whenever possible, he slipped into the forest to seek out those same plants. The woods felt like home to him, gentle, alive, and safe in a way the noble courts never were. Even wild beasts didn't frighten him. Once, his father had caught him stroking the fur of a wolf and chased it away, scolding him for days afterward. Yet Emery still snuck back to the forest whenever he could. By noon, anticipation quickened his steps. After a hurried meal and quick wash, Emery dressed in his best clothes, a white linen shirt under a leather jerkin. The smell wasn't pleasant, but it was all he had. Unlike the higher-ranking nobles, whose wardrobes reeked of luxury, the Ambrose family was modest, fifth in rank, lowest among the noble houses. Emery didn't complain. They had food, shelter, and each other, and that was enough. He tucked the wooden box into his pouch and hurried to the stables, where 2 brown horses waited. "This is it," Emery whispered, checking the pouch once more. Today he would ride with his father to the estate of the Lioness family, the most powerful house in the kingdom. And there, he would see Princess Gwen again.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
It was already late afternoon when they arrived. When Emery had seen the Lioness castle from afar, he couldn't help but still feel in awe, even though he had seen the estate countless times. The lioness estate had high wooden spiked walls placed in a circle to protect the elevated stone castle in the middle. A lot of commoners were moving around, entering and exiting the outside of the wall. Guards were patrolling everywhere. The market's atmosphere seemed so bright and lively, unlike his family's estate. They soon arrived at the house of the lioness, which even had more grandeur because of today's event. Its high walls displayed a red cloth, accented with gold-colored linings, and an image of a lion's head in the middle. The moment the father and son dismounted from their horses, a condescending voice called their attention. Well, if it isn't the Ambroses," said a bearded, fat man wearing a luxurious coat. "Good evening, Phantomar," replied Geoffrey with a slight bow. Emery was still dazed by the banner of the castle and the prospect of meeting the princess that he failed to properly greet the noble in front of him. Phantomar clicked his tongue, seeing such disrespect, and said, "A boy with no manners. You should teach him better, Ambrose." "Yes, forgive me. I will," Geoffrey said. Behind Phantomar was another large boy who appeared to be the same age as Emery and a head taller. "He's smelly too, father," said the pig boy, pinching his nose. "Don't worry yourself with such a lowborn." "Abe," said Phantomar. "Let's go, my son, before their smell sticks with us." Abe then smirked and issued a proud look before walking away with his father. Emery feigned indifference as he stared at the pig nobles behind him. However, he had his fist clenched the whole time. He and his father were being insulted, but he couldn't do anything since his father had always reminded him not to make any trouble in front of such a noble. After all, the Phantomar nobility was the second highest-ranking noble in the kingdom next to the king's family, and was also the right hand of the king. Their statuses were worlds apart, even if both families were nobility. Emery was smart enough to understand this. It didn't take too long for the other families to arrive. Some rode horses, but some were also in their carriages at the castle's front gate. Soon, they entered the castle one by one. The hallway was large and had a lot of hanging decorations made of varying colors of cloth. The walls had a lot of trophies, swords and shields, bows, spears, etc., showing how the king loved to hunt. In the middle of the room, a large table had been set and a feast of milk, mutton, bread, cheese, soup, vegetables, alesh, etc. Music from the trumpets and cymbals filled the whole palace while the curvaceous dancers entertained the guests, mingling with each other. "Attention, everyone!" shouted the announcer. All the nobles stopped what they were doing and turned to the person who shouted. "All hail His Royal Majesty, the first of his name, the fearsome hunter, His Eminence, Richard the Lioness and his daughter, the first of her name, Princess Gwyneth." The guests looked up on the main hall's grand stairs. Then, the king appeared wearing a coat filled with fur on its neck. The crown on his head showed an insignia of a standing lion. His amazing presence, however, was overshadowed by the beautiful girl descending beside him. Her silky golden hair bounced like a golden waterfall in the air, while the emerald circlet highlighted her beautiful, unblemished cheeks, tiny nose, and lips. The tight green dress she wore flowed smoothly from her chest down to the floor, displaying to the fullest her wonderful figure. Emery stood in awe with his mouth agape, staring at the beautiful princess. Then he realized the princess's gaze fell on him. She sweetly smiled at him briefly before looking down, watching her steps on the stairs. Emery's heart skipped. He looked to his left, right, behind, and below with a confused look, but no one was there other than his father. Did she just smile at him? Emery couldn't help but scratch his head while feeling his face hot. The atmosphere became rowdy as the people raised their mugs and cheered for the princess coming of age ceremony. The feast began. The lively music reverberated around the great hall as the king took a seat on his throne. Princess Gwyneth stood beside the king, and the nobles started to form a line to greet the king and his daughter. The line was in accordance with the ranking of the nobles. Therefore, the Ambrose was the last to greet the king and the princess. All the nobles before the Ambrose presented expensive gifts: jewels, necklace, circlets, etc., especially the Phantomar, when the son, Abe, presented a chest full of gold and silver. The other nobles gasped on how precious the gift was. Unfortunately, the gifts presented to the princess seemed to have not moved her. That was until it was the Ambroses' turn. Emery and Geoffrey bowed before the king and the princess. Emery glanced at the princess, and her eyes seemed to have lit up. He stepped forward and grabbed the pouch dangling in front of him, but stopped. Geoffrey noticed his son's hesitation and said, "We apologize that we are unable to provide a gift this time, Our Royal Majesty and Royal Princess. We have had a tough year, and thus do not have any worthy to bring out for your royal presences." "Pfft, such a poor excuse and disgrace," commented Fantomar. "It is fine, Fantomar," said Richard. He raised his hand and added, "You are forgiven. Rise and enjoy my daughter's special day. We are here, after all, to celebrate my daughter's 16th birthday. All praise be to you, my king," said Geoffrey, bowing once more before leaving with Emery. The two made their way to the long table and sat in the furthest corner. His father, of course, came as a respect for the king. In fact, it wasn't long ago that his father had once been a trusted confidant of the king, but it was a past that his father didn't wish to discuss. The feast began, and everyone enjoyed the meals presented by the king. Princess Gwen broke off from her father and decided to greet the nobles one by one. She went by the order of the rankings of the nobles. Of course, it was still up to her whether she would decide on greeting that family or not. Emery began eating his meal with a sullen face. He wanted to give what he had worked on for months, but when he saw what the others had to offer, he became embarrassed by what he was about to present. A wooden figurine of the princess. What a laughable gift. He looked up and found the princess mingling with the other guests. But again, Emery noticed she stole a glance toward his direction. Then, finally, she seemed to have cut off her conversation with the other nobility and walked toward where he and his father were seated. Emery's heart began to pound as the beautiful girl made her way with her handmaiden behind. But from a corner, a pig appeared with his entourage and blocked her way. "Good evening, lovely princess," Abe said. He bowed with his fat belly twisting and added, "If I may say, your beauty is as wonderful as the stars that shine through the darkness of the night." "Abe, how can I help you?" said Gwen, ignoring the boy's remark. Emery grunted in his heart when this boy appeared. He seemed to have noticed, but wasn't sure because of his dislike of the boy. But it felt like the princess smiled, and mood turned sour. Princess Gwen was the princess of the Lioness Kingdom, one of the 7 kingdoms among the Britons. Although their kingdom was the smallest, it was one of the richest due to their location near the coast. Her golden hair, green eyes, and white porcelain skin earned her the adoration of many, making her the jewel of the kingdom. Tomorrow was her coming-of-age ceremony, and many of the nobles would come to visit her father's castle. Which one do you think suits me better, the white or the gold one?" asked Gwen as she compared the 2 dresses the wooden mannequins were wearing with her emerald eyes. "You are pretty in both dresses, my lady," answered her handmaiden. She sneakily rolled her eyes, since that wasn't helpful. Gwen stood beside the mannequin dressed in white and said, "I think the white one is perfect for me. What do you think?" "Yes, you're lovely in white, my lady," said another handmaiden. She switched positions and went to the other mannequin and said, "At second thought, I think the gold one would look better on me. It highlights my eyes, right?" "Yes, you're absolutely right, my lady," replied the first handmaiden with a slight bow. Another bland answer. Whenever she asked for the other's opinion, all she would hear was praise. No one dared oppose her or give their real thoughts, unlike her mother, the late queen. She sighed as she took a seat and stared at the portrait of her mother hanging on the wall of her dressing room. Gwen bit her lips slightly, wishing her mother was here. After all, tomorrow was her 16th birthday. And even though she was surrounded by a lot of handmaidens and a lot of people would come to see her, she couldn't help feeling more lonely. The door knocked, and one of the handmaidens opened it. One more handmaiden came in and gave Gwen the news. She then rushed toward the king's study room. There were 2 men talking, and one of them was the king, but her purpose for going here was to see the other person whom her father was talking to. She jumped at the man and said, "Uncle, there she is." "My lovely niece," said Brett, returning her big hug. Brett was the younger brother of Gwen's late mother. He wasn't like any other nobleman who loved to stay in their fiefs. Instead, he loved to go adventuring across the 7 kingdoms and even farther. He would usually be gone for months, but his latest expedition had taken him almost 2 years. I miss you, Uncle. Please tell me all your great adventures. Where did you go? How were the people? What did you ask? Gwen stopped as she heard her father's cough. Brett laughed and said, hold your horses, my niece. I'll tell you all about it tonight. I'm actually here because of your special day tomorrow. Don't think I've forgotten about it. For now, I'd like for you to close your eyes. My apologies, said Gwen as she calmed herself and closed her eyes. She heard her uncle rustle through his large pouch. Her heart quickened. She knew what her uncle intended to do next. After all, he had always done this. Whenever he came back, he always had something unique to give her from one of his travels. Hold out your hands, Brett said. As soon as she did, a rough but light item fell on her palms. Her eyes sparkled and saw the coarse, rolled-up parchment. Gwen unrolled it and stared at the drawing. Richard sighed and said, Brother, you're spoiling her again. I'm blaming you for her mischievous attitude. Please forgive me, my king. But she's the only remembrance the late queen has left us, said Brett with his fist on his chest. Gwen turned the parchment to the left, right, and somehow realized. She said, Uncle, is this? Brett smiled and said, Yes, smart girl. This is called the world map. This was first created in Greek, but now almost all places I've traveled to in Europe use it. Such a wonderful gift, Uncle. Thank you, Uncle, said Gwen, hugging her uncle once more. This was one of the best gifts she had received in advance, which was even more precious than any of the beautiful dresses or jewels. Well, off you go now. I have some things to discuss with the king. I understand, Uncle, but promise me you'll spend time telling me about your adventure. Gwen gave him a big smile and issued a ladylike bow before leaving. That night, Gwen enjoyed the stories of all the places her uncle had traveled to until she slept. And because of that, she dreamt about the different houses, the people, animals, and the world far, far away. When she had awoken, all she could still think about was the dream and all the places her uncle had mentioned. In fact, her mind was even more occupied with those thoughts rather than her coming-of-age ceremony. She really wished to talk to someone about it, and while getting ready, a noble boy came to her mind. She said to herself, yes, I'm sure he'll be here today. The ceremony started, and the moment she descended the stairs beside her father, her eyes immediately caught sight of a boy who looked more like a commoner compared to the rest of the nobles in the area. She couldn't wait to walk over to him, but she must attend first to her duty. Thus, she was stealing glances at him. The gift-giving ended, as well as greetings. Now, she must attend to her duties. She went and greeted the other nobles by herself with her handmaidens behind. When said to the last noble family she had mingled with, I hope you are enjoying yourselves. She looked once more at where the boy was, and then added, Please excuse me. She made her way toward him, but the son of her father's advisor, the Fandamar boy, blocked her path and said some cringe words. Gwen slightly furrowed her brows. She never liked this boy, but as a respect to his family status, she said, Abe, how can I help you? Your royal princess. I would like to. My apologies, but I can't talk to you right now, Abe, said Gwen when she saw the boy stood up and try to walk away. Gwen walked straight to the boy and exclaimed, Emery. And without notice, she grabbed his arm and dragged him outside. That act surprised some nobles, especially the young noble, Abe, whom the princess had cut off and left for the lowborn boy. That night was bright as the moon and stars shone its light on the two teenagers running in the lioness palace garden. They passed by different plants and flowers neatly arranged according to their species. Soon the boy and the girl reached the edge of the garden, and the gentle crashing wave permeated their ears as the salty smell of the sea wafted into their noses. He was with her in the enchanting garden, the great view of the sea, the sound of the waves. The rays of the moon and stars reflected from the coast to her, making her beauty indescribable. Emery didn't want to let go of the smooth and soft hand of the most beautiful girl he had ever laid eyes upon. His heart thumped against his chest. The footsteps of the handmaidens and guards neared, and Gwen released her grip on him. Princess Gwen? We could get in trouble. Oh, come on, Emery. You don't have to call me princess. We'll be fine. Anyway, the ceremony is over, and I felt like suffocating there. I needed a breath of fresh air. Please, will you accompany me, please? Unbeknownst to her, Emery was actually more concerned about how he would get scolded by his father, but he couldn't possibly refuse a request by the princess. Could he? Besides, the view here with the jewel of the kingdom. How could he say no to that? Give me 1 second. I have a surprise for you, said Gwen as she turned around. Surprise? It's me who is supposed to... Emery grabbed his pouch, but Gwen wasn't listening to him one bit. She found what she was looking for and said, Look at this, Emery. Is this? Emery's eyes shone, recognizing what Gwen took out from him. That's right, approved Gwen with a smile. This one below is called Africa, and the one on the farthest is China. It's like the story from Parchment we had read before. Emery and Gwen had known each other for quite some time now. When all the other kids were riding horses and hunting, Emery loved to spend his time reading. He had finished all the parchments and scrolls he could find in his father's library. So, whenever his father had matters to attend to in the lioness's castle, he always forced his father to let him come. He had spent a lot of time reading the various stories found in the royal library, and that was where he had often met with Gwen. Although they didn't often meet, they got along so fast probably because they had 2 things in common. The first was they both loved to study and read about the various history, places, and curiosity of the world, and the second was both of their mothers had died when they were young. Although much of it all thanks to the princess' friendly attitude. That evening, they talked for almost an hour about the places on those maps they had only heard in stories. Oh, Emery, how I wish to go see these places. Whenever Gwen talked about the things she loved, her dreams, her eyes always sparkled. I'm sure you can. You are a princess. You can do anything you want, said Emery. Without realizing it, the princess's dream of exploring the world became part of Emery's dream too. Whether it was because he, himself, was interested in all the wonders of this world, or because he would love to go on an adventure with her. Gwen turned her face on Emery with a big smile and said, That's very sweet of you to say. Thank you. Before turning dark and added, Thank you again. I feel really great now that I've talked with you. You really are a good friend. Emery's heart slightly prickled. He liked her, but when he thought about it more, being labeled as a friend of the most beautiful lady in the kingdom was a fortune in itself. Maybe that was all they would ever be. He then realized he still hadn't given the thing he had worked on for months. Reluctantly reaching his hand into the pouch, he embarrassedly said, Gwen, I also have something for you. What is it? Asked Gwen, tilting her head on the side. Emery handed out the pouch before pulling it back. He laughed. What's the hesitation? Is that for me? Thank you, said Gwen. What box is this, Emery? Before she was able to open up the box, however, sounds of step got closer. Ahem, coughed a big man wearing a luxurious coat, 2 men walking toward them. Father, Sir Phantomar, said Gwen. Emery was shocked to see the king right next to him, and Phantomar, the highest noble of the kingdom. Your Highness, exclaimed Emery, bowing before the king. The king recognized him. You're Geoffrey's boy, aren't you? Yes, my lord, replied Emery. I've heard many things about you from my daughter. The fat noble interjected. Your Highness, I suggest you stop the princess from playing with this boy. As the right hand, it was Phantomar's role to be the advisor of the king. One of the conditions to achieve that role was to be the first-ranking noble, just 1 rank below the king and the trust of the king. The rankings of the nobles determined their social statuses, and in order to be on the rankings, they either played politics or great deeds in the battlefield. It was not uncommon to rise in the ranks due to battle contributions, but it was also not uncommon to fall from grace due to political intrigue, just like the Ambroses. The Ambrose family was already at the bottom of the barrel, but Phantomar's pressing further by asking the princess and the king not to socialize with Emery was pushing it. Gwen stomped the ground and glared at the fat noble. Her voice had a sense of sharpness in them. Lord Phantomar, you may be my father's right hand, but you're out of line telling me who I can and cannot be friends with. Phantomar furrowed his brows. This princess had always been a pain in the ass for their family. He turned to the boy instead and ordered, Boy, raise your head, let us see your face. Emery, feeling brave because of the princess backing him up, raised his face and looked Phantomar directly in the eyes. Fantomar smirked. The light of the moonlight reflecting on Emery's eyes confirmed his suspicions. He wasn't sure when he had seen this kid earlier at the gate, but now he confirmed. "Do you see it, sire? The boy has his mother's eyes." "What do you mean, Fantomar?" asked Richard. "You see, sire." Fantomar leaned closer and whispered, "He's a half-blood." "Ugh! A fey Cruton!" exclaimed Richard, staring at Emery's eyes. Fey Cruton were humans who lived in the deep forested areas of the Britons. It was said that they loved to socialize with the mysterious creatures of the forest, the Fey creatures. The Fey Cruton lived without following the kingdom rule. For hundreds of years, the Fey Cruton and the people of the kingdom people had always been at war. The Lioness Kingdom's military had attempted to burn these forests multiple times just to drive out the Fey Cruton, but for reasons unknown, the fires never seemed to spread out. Thus, all sorts of rumors from the Fey Crutons knowing black magic, witchcraft, mythical creatures, etc. began to spread. At this moment, another figure walked in. It was Geoffrey Ambrose, Emery's father. He didn't waste one more second and got down on one knee in front of the king. "My liege, I apologize for the behavior of my son. I hope he didn't offend you in any way. I will discipline him better." The king stared at Geoffrey with a complicated look. He said, "Is what Fantomar said true? That your late wife is a Cruton?" Emery didn't know what was going on. What was a Cruton? What about his late mother? All these were things he had never known. He looked at his father, kneeling to the king, and felt a pang of pain in his heart. He didn't like seeing his father like this. The strength, power, the confidence of his father seemed to have faded. Geoffrey replied with a heavy tone, "It is true, my king." The king's face darkened. His wrinkles appeared, his fist tightened, and his mouth clenched. The Crutons were the reason he had lost his wife. He hated them with all his being. Emery also noticed how Gwen's face had changed. He still didn't understand what was happening. Everyone except him seemed to know what was going on. "Gwen, come with me right now." Richard turned to the father and son and said a single word that was full of hate: "Leave." "Father, now," roared Richard. Gwen was startled. Her father had never shouted at her. This was the first. She looked at Emery with a complicated face and said, "I'm sorry. I don't think we can be friends." Richard grabbed Gwen, prompting her to drop the box Emery had given, and dragged her back into the palace. Emery blankly stared at the broken box with figurine pieces on the ground. He was about to pick it up when the palace guard barred his way. They were then shown out of the palace. Once they were outside, the gates behind them were shut. Emery was at a loss as he gazed at the towering wooden gate, wondering what did he do wrong? Why did the princess and the king look at him like that? He asked his father for answers, but all his father gave was a weak smile. The ride home was full of unbearable silence. Emery wished instead for his father to just scold him. Back at the palace, Fantomar watched the Ambrose father and son riding their horses. He deviously smiled at how they were now on the king's bad side. However, that wasn't enough for him. It was already evening when Emery finished his daily duties. He was outside, lying on the grass while staring at the 3 shining stars lined up in a row. He tried to make sense of what happened last night at the castle, but after spending all day in his father's library, even asking the scholar, who refused to answer, the answers to his questions could only be revealed by his father. Emery went to the main hall and saw his father still drinking. He had seen him drinking since afternoon, but he was still continuing this evening. Simply silent, drinking alcohol. Emery walked up his father and said to him almost a whisper, "Father, I am sorry." Geoffrey dazedly lifted his head and replied, "You're fine, my son. It wasn't your fault. It never has been your fault." Emery asked, "If it wasn't my fault, then what happened, father? Please tell me." Geoffrey opened his mouth, closed it before saying, "It's nothing, my boy. I just miss your mother so much, that's all. Father, I know there's something going on. I am not a kid anymore." For a moment, his father pondered something before taking another sip of his ale and said, "Okay, tomorrow. I'll tell you tomorrow. It's already late now. You should get some sleep." Emery was about to press the matter further when the sound of their horn for battle resounded from the distance. He and his father made their way to the window and saw silhouettes from the distance carrying torches. The main hall's door banged open, and one of the knights came in. "My lord, marauders have come too." A sword protruded from the knight's chest. The sword was pulled back, and blood splashed on the ground. 3 bloodied marauders arrived. Their faces were covered with cloth. "There they are, boys!" exclaimed the marauder in front. "Kill these crouton-loving people." "Emery, hide!" shouted Geoffrey as he withdrew the sword hanging on his sheath. "No, I want to help you," protested Emery. "It's not the time to argue." "Do what I ask," said Geoffrey, clashing with the blade of one of the marauders. The other 2 tried to flank from the side. Geoffrey pushed the first marauder and jumped back, dodging the attacks from the sides. He waved his sword, and 2 heads rolled down on the wooden floor. In just a matter of seconds, the marauder's comrades had died. The marauder then took a step back and ran away. Geoffrey had once been a higher-ranking noble. He had never played the politics of the kingdom to become a higher-ranking noble. Instead, his great contributions in major battles with other kingdoms were well known throughout the whole land, earning him the title, the Lion's Fawn. So, even when Geoffrey had been drinking since afternoon, his skills with the sword were still unparalleled. Geoffrey said to his son, "Follow me." "But now," roared his father. Emery and Geoffrey made their way to the cellar. His father went to the torch on the furthest corner and pulled it, revealing a passage behind the cupboard. Geoffrey said, "Hurry. It'll be dark, so I need you to keep walking straight with your hand on the wall. At the end of the passage, there'll be a ladder leading to the stables. Take a horse, go west, and follow the river. You'll be safe there." "What about you?" asked Emery. "I'll hold them off here and make sure no one will be following. Once I've made sure everything is clear, I'll find." "Over here," shouted an unknown person. Shuffling steps near to where they were, and Geoffrey stopped his words. He whispered before pushing the torch, "You're my world, my son. Grow up and be strong. Go now." Emery didn't finish his words because his father pushed him behind the closing cupboard. He got up and noticed a broken slit where he could peek through. He put his eyes on it and watched as dozens of marauders entered the cellar. "Where's your boy?" "Crouton lover," asked the marauder. It was the same marauder who had run away. He went back after calling his comrades. "You'll never find him. Now, enough talk, and show me what you got," declared Geoffrey, brandishing his steel sword. "Kill him," said the marauder. Emery witnessed his father's might. One by one the marauders fell, but there were too many of them. Slowly, his father's breath became ragged and fell on one knee. The first marauder managed to sneak behind him and slashed Geoffrey on the back. Geoffrey faced flat the dusty ground and struggled to get up, but the marauder stomped on his back, preventing Geoffrey from getting up. Emery stopped himself from shouting by putting his hands against his mouth. Tears were welling from his eyes. He felt helpless watching his father being struck down. The marauder twisted his neck in the direction where the cupboard was and smirked. Geoffrey's eyes widened. He had told his son to run away, but he was still here. With the last bit of his strength, he pushed up, making the marauder lose his balance. Geoffrey then tightened his grip on his sword and impaled the marauder on the wall. He shouted with all he could, "Run!" before being struck with multiple swords on the back. He was still alive, blood on his lips, chest, and back. He swung his sword once more, but hit no one. Geoffrey muttered, "Run." Finally, Geoffrey fell unmoving on the ground. Emery froze. He didn't know what to do. The last words of his father just registered on his mind. "Run." And that was what he did. He ran and ran, got up the ladder to where the stables were, but all the horses were dead. The crackling flames, the clashing of swords, the cries of his people rang out everywhere in the place where Emery had lived his whole life. Emery gazed at where their house was, and the roaring flames engulfed everything it touched. He then ran west, toward the forest, as his father had asked. As soon as he entered the forest, however, he heard horses galloping. One of the marauders had actually seen Emery from afar and gave chase. He kept on running toward the river, but his weak legs couldn't bear it any longer, making him trip on one of the tree's roots. Emery rolled down onto the freezing river. He struggled to stay afloat and unintentionally drank water, making his every breath hurt like needles stinging his lungs. There were 2 marauders that caught up and descended from their horses. They watched Emery drowning at the river's strong current. "Let's leave. The boy won't be able to survive this freezing river," said the marauder. "Shouldn't we at least confirm it?" asked the other marauder. "Are you dumb? Can't you see how strong the current is? If he doesn't die from drowning, then he'll freeze to death. I'm sure he'll die one way or another." "Okay, whatever you say." The two marauders mounted on their horses and left. Emery sank. He couldn't do anything against the stream and fell down on a lake when the river ended. His heart pounded against his chest. It felt like his lungs were about to explode. He wished for something, anyone, anything to save him. Soon, he stopped struggling. He was losing consciousness until he arrived at the bottom of the lake. Is this the end? He didn't notice, however, that a vine was worming its way toward him. The vine wrapped against his leg and pulled him back on land. A few seconds later, he coughed violently, spitting out all the water he had drunk. Emery didn't know how he survived. He then crawled on the muddy ground. He was now lying down, staring at the night sky. Every part of his body was hurting. He was shivering, his vision was blurring, but his gaze fell once more on the 3 stars lined up in a row. He wished upon the 3 stars. "Please, save me. I don't want to die. Father." Emery struggled to keep his eyes open, but there was like a weight pulling it down to close until he was unable to open it any longer. He was weak, cold, and dying. But then, the stars seemed to have answered his wish. The star in the middle of the 3 lit up as a ray of light, hit Emery's frail body, and floated before vanishing. That was what happened to Emery before being transported to this world. Thus, he couldn't think of anything other than this place being a world after death or a world of the gods. But that was before he heard the old man saying they would return to their original world after 7 days. Emery pondered the meaning of that sentence, but he was torn whether he wanted to go back or not. After all, was there anything else that would make him want to go back? His father had been killed, his entire estate had been burned to the ground, and even the princess. The princess who had said they couldn't even be at least friends. Maybe revenge against the marauders? But what power did he have to defeat them? He was weak and frail. Whatever excuse he could come up with to return, he always had something to contradict it with. For now, he just followed the group of young people in front of him. Julian and Thrax were still giving each other a deadly stare, while Chumo was still silent on the side, keeping a suspicious eye on everything around him. A beautiful woman, however, invaded Emery's vision and thoughts. "Hello, you. Emery, right?" asked the bronze-skinned girl with her sweet voice. She added, "I hope you're different from that boy trying to pick a fight." Emery slightly jumped back. This girl startled him. She was too close. He recollected himself and looked at this young lady. Unconsciously, he compared her with Gwen. Gwen was like an ember for Emery, something warm and something he still couldn't touch, but could get close to without getting burnt. But this girl, Clea, Emery felt like she was a fire that would eat him up if he got too close. Clea was young, the same age as them, but her dark hair, big round eyes coupled with black linings on the edges, and attire that showed off her brown, curvaceous body, were enough to make Emery's heart jump against his chest. She was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She had this unique womanly appeal that Gwen didn't have. Clea gracefully crossed her arms and said, "I'm surprised you aren't more excited." "Excited? What do you mean?" asked Emery, confused. "We are in a mystical place." Clea pointed upward and added, "Look up there. There are floating islands and houses in the sky. They couldn't compare to the pyramids our mighty pharaohs built." Emery followed the direction of her finger and fell into deep thought. She was right. How come he didn't notice it before? He stood there in awe of the magical events happening all around him. Emery? Hello, are you there?" Emery shook his head and mindlessly asked, "Yes?" Clea put her hands on her hips and leaned her face closer to Emery. Emery could smell the wonderful fragrance emitting from her body and see the smooth curves that were the pride of women. His face felt flushed. "Emery, do you think I'm beautiful?" "Ah, yes, you are," he blurted out in panic. "If that's the case, then listen when a beautiful woman is talking to you." "Understood," said Clea in a sharp tone, but it was still like a melody to the ears. Emery didn't have any other choice but to nod multiple times. Clea was about to lecture him more when their line suddenly stopped. They both looked in front. "All who are in Class 77, enter from this portal," said a man with the black and gold armor. Portal was a term Emery hadn't heard of. However, based on what Emery had seen so far, this portal acted like a door, even though this door looked like it was made from the wind and light. It had a circle shape and appeared to be shining, and there was nothing behind it. "Let's go, Emery. That's our class," exclaimed Clea without fear of the unknown. She grabbed his hand and dragged Emery toward the glowing circle. The boy and girl passed through the portal, and their whole surroundings changed. They were now in a place that had white tiles, white walls, and golden pillars neatly arranged in symmetry. It was so elegant that the lioness throne room couldn't hold a candle against this. The room had a platform in the middle, while there were rows of stairs coupled with desks in each row, forming a semicircle. There were already other people, who appeared to be the same age as him, already seated facing toward the platform in front, were a woman wearing a pointy hat that matched the purple dress she had on her. It was a unique sight for all of them, except for Julian, who seemed to have been in a similar place before. He walked in front of the other four and took the lead to sit in the front row, where there was another group of boys and girls sitting. One of the boys, though, stood up and pointed on his chest. "You don't belong here, lower world citizens. Sit behind in the corner." Julian stayed silent, but not shaken. He looked at the black-haired boy wearing a black and white uniform from head to toe. Thrax, on the other hand, made his way in front of Julian and proceeded to shout. "What do you mean, lower world? Are you looking for a fight?" He readied his fist, and the rest of the boys and girls in uniforms stood up. They were ready to fight. Julian was still confident and touched Thrax on the shoulder before blocking him. He then smiled and said, Sorry. I understand. We'll sit in the back." He turned around, pulled Thrax, and waved his head at the Chumo, Emery, and Clea. They followed him. After taking their seats, Thrax crossed his arms, spat on the floor, and said, "Roman pig, coward. Stupid barbarian. Use your brains, not muscles," replied Julian, unconcerned. Thrax knew what Julian meant, however. After all, they were in an unfamiliar place and unfamiliar people. Still, Thrax hated that boy in the black and white uniform's guts. He was always like this, fist first before talking. Emery silently sighed to himself. It was the same, even in a different world. There were always class differences, statuses, and privileged people in all places. He made a mental note to himself regarding the four people he had been interacting with. Julian, Thrax, and Clea had open personalities, while Chumo remained mysterious. In fact, since the beginning, Chumo just kept a knowing look at the others and didn't reveal anything other than his name and city of origin. The portal closed, and not long after, the woman dressed in purple from top to bottom clapped her hands, the sound resonating throughout the whole room, and began to speak. "It looks like everyone is here. Let me welcome all of you. The 100 new acolytes of Class 77. You may call me Minerva, and I will be your guide for the next 7 days. Listen to my instructions, and if you are lucky, maybe a few of you can become a magus." Magus? A lot of the young men and women were confused. They asked the people next to them if they knew what a magus was. However, they also didn't have any ideas except for those groups of boys and girls in their black and white attires. They remained calm. "Magus? What do you mean by magus?" asked a random boy. Minerva raised one hand, and the wind around the whole room stirred. Trails of wind around headed to Minerva and converged into her hand. Wind wasn't usually visible, but there was a large sphere of wind spinning at the top of her hand. She casually explained, "Magus, sorcerer, which magician, wizard, shaman, warlock, element weaver, etc. These are all different terms for different worlds, but all pertain to the same thing. People who have talents in wielding the universe's primordial energy around them. There are trillions of people in existence throughout our galaxy, but only hundreds of thousands have the ability to handle the universe's power. And as you all can see, I am wielding the wind's energy." Almost everyone had their eyes peeled out and mouths gaped in disbelief. For a lot of them, this was the first they had seen such a spectacle. Minerva clasped her hand, and the wind lightly exploded before dispersing to its natural state. She smirked as she looked around, a little amused at these little boys and girls reacting with such expressions. She asked, "I wonder, have any of you seen magic done before?" Less than a third of them raised their hands. That was including Clea. "Clea, you as well?" Julian exclaimed in doubt. Clea pulled back her hand and crossed her arm. "Of course. The priests in our court sometimes do rituals for a fruitful year by making it rain or having the Nile River flooded. On some special occasions as well, they put out a performance by turning staves into snakes." Her elegance, arrogance at times, and the way she referred to her people, Emery had noticed it and couldn't help but think she comes from a noble background. Minerva nodded and asked another question. "Next, who among you are already capable of handling the universe's energy?" This time, fewer people raised their hands. It was like 1 to 2 in every 10 people. In fact, most of them even came from those arrogant boys and girls, sitting in the front with black and white uniforms that raised their hands. Emery wanted to know more if there were others that could do magic. He found another, sitting in the corner opposite to them. Since he had good eyesight, he could make out what the girl somewhat looked like. She had long black hair that was peeking through the large dark veil she was wearing. Her pale skin was almost as white as the dress she was wearing. And as Emery stared at her, her veil suddenly shifted toward his direction, and Emery felt a chill run down his spine, making him look away and turning his attention back to Minerva. Minerva had an unimpressed face. She walked closer to the group of young boys and girls at the front and touched the bracelet on her wrist. The room darkened, and her bracelet flashed an image in the middle of the room. At the center of the image, a big sphere was floating with 4 tails spiraling toward the edge of the image and lots of tiny shining dots in between the tails. The dots were of different colors: blue, white, yellow, orange, red, and of different sizes. Minerva pointed her wrist at the group of young people, and the floating image of lights zoomed in and focused on a green and blue ball. She said with an unimpressed tone, "World 0623. Kalios. So all of you came from a Magus world. I guess it isn't surprising that 18 people from your world were chosen." She flicked her wrist, and the floating ball disappeared. Minerva said, "Our galaxy has hundreds of thousands of human worlds. Every year, 10,000 talented young people are selected from 1,000 lucky worlds. Since there were hundreds of thousands of worlds, it usually took hundreds of years before a world was re-elected. Of course, there were some worlds that got special treatment, such as Kalios. The human worlds were divided into 3 categories: lower-class worlds that still hadn't harnessed the power of nature, middle-class worlds that made use of metals, water, earth to the human's advantage. It would be to describe middle-class worlds as an industrial age. Lastly, the upper-class worlds, wherein great inventions were made, such as harnessing the power of electricity, like those who had reached the modern era, or even better, Magus era. Kalios belonged to the upper-class worlds. At least there would be 10 people selected from upper-class worlds. In fact, these worlds receive the opportunity once every 5 years. Emery listened intently to Minerva's explanation. So, he couldn't help but think that those arrogant boys and girls were in their place to act high and mighty. Julian commented, "Our world is so big, but only 5 of us were chosen. It looks like our world gets selected at least tens of years or hundreds of years. It seems we are very lucky." Minerva continued her explanation. "Since first-year acolytes only get 7 days of studying, it is best that all of you study diligently. This may be a once-in-a-lifetime for you and maybe your world. Do not waste the chance we are giving you." Emery couldn't help but feel glad at the prospect of learning a skill called magic. Studying was what he was best at, and he was always interested in learning new things. Now that we've got that settled, the first step in learning to become a Magus is to know yourself. Minerva flicked her finger, and another round object appeared. "I need everyone to stand up and wait for this crystal ball to fly over your head. Let's see how many talented children we have this year." Minerva smiled as she waited for the 100 young people to stand up and did she had instructed. That smile, however, made Emery and the others uncomfortable. The crystal ball on Minerva's hand floated and then flew toward the young boy in the first row who was the closest to her. It hovered above him and shot a ray of light. The crystal ball then mixed the colors inside it until it finally settled on a single color. Scan complete. Yellow. Earth affinity. It spoke. Almost everyone was baffled. How can objects speak? Minerva didn't bother explaining as the crystal ball selected its new target and went above the mysterious young girl, wearing a large veil with her long hair peeking on its edges and snowish white skin. It didn't take long for the ball to turn to glow green. Scan complete. Green. Plant affinity. The others who didn't understand started muttering. Minerva then started explaining while the crystal ball flew around. A lot of you must be wondering. Let me explain here. The whole universe was nothing but darkness in its infancy. And from that darkness, gods and goddesses emerged. The gods and goddesses, however, were split in what they wanted to accomplish. Some wanted to fill the worlds with life. Some wanted eternal emptiness. It was inevitable that a battle would erupt between the gods and goddesses, and it did. Eons have passed, and the gods and goddesses' battles ended. Those who have wanted life won, obviously. The primordial energies that erupted from the battle from the gods and goddesses birthed uncountable galaxies, and one of them is ours. These energies are what we call the 10 elements. The 10 elements are divided into 4 main elements, namely the fire, wind, water, and earth, while the 4 sub-elements are the lightning, ice, plant, and metal. These are the 8 elements that are the most abundant in the whole universe. But the last 2 elements are the ties that hold everything together. They are also the rarest to appear in a person, the darkness and light. As soon as Minerva finished explaining, the crystal ball hovering over a bald and modestly clothed boy shone white. Scan complete. White. Light affinity. Minerva turned slightly red, whether it was because of excitement or embarrassment only she knew. As I've said, it is quite rare that we have an acolyte with light or dark elements every year. The crystal ball selected people at random, and it finally came back to the group of youths from Kalios, a Magus world. Another young boy from their world was scanned, and the crystal glowed red before its half turned purple. Scan complete. Red and purple. Dual affinity. Fire and wind. Having multiple elemental affinities is like having a double-edged sword. It is both fortune and curse. Minerva commented at the young boy who had a smug look on his face at first. A couple of minutes had passed, and the crystal ball was almost finished scanning everyone. The 18 youths from Kalios had mostly single elemental affinity, but 5 of them had dual elements. Minerva wasn't surprised, however. After all, she knew that the average person who grew up in a Magus world learned how to cultivate whatever elemental affinity they had from an early age. Not long after, the crystal ball floated over Emery's group. They were the last people to be scanned. It first approached Julian and shot its beam. It turned yellow before being split in half with red. Yellow and red. Dual affinity. Earth and fire. Julian whistled with a smile on his face. Thrax was the next to be scanned. Red. Fire affinity. Julian had half a smile as he watched Thrax trying to argue with the crystal ball why he had less elemental affinity compared to the Roman pig. But Julian's cheeky smile turned into awe as he watched crystal divide itself into 3 above Clea. The colors inside the ball showed 3 distinct shades. Scan complete. Purple, blue, and indigo. Triple affinity. Wind, water, and lightning. From out of the 100 youths in this class, so far you're the only acolyte who has 3 elements, Minerva commented with a knowing look. The class started a slight uproar and faces of slight admiration, especially the boys. Indeed, there were many of them, and this beautiful, sexy, bronze-skinned woman had 3 affinities. The other girls' faces, however, told a different story that showed how rare it was for a person to have 3 of the elements. Truly an extraordinary lady, exclaimed Julian. It wasn't much, replied Clea, flicking her hair. Congratulations, Clea, said Emery with a grin. Thank you, cutie, smiled Clea with a wink. Next, the crystal moved toward Chumo and showed a single color. Black. Darkness affinity. Emery didn't have time to congratulate Chumo for the rare element, because he was blinded by the light rays coming from the crystal ball. He closed his eyes, slightly afraid of what he was about to hear and see. Since childhood, Emery believed he had never had success. The people around him always had low expectations of him. Even his father, who had always treated him like a little boy. He never felt special nor a protagonist of the stories he had read in his father's library. The crystal ball shone bright before becoming dark and then transparent. It was quiet. The crystal ball needed only a few seconds to finish a scan, but this was a bit too long. Emery opened his eyes and stared at the transparent crystal ball. He sighed. It was just as he had thought. He was nothing. He wasn't special. But why was he even here? Did someone or something make a mistake? He was about to sit down when Clea muttered his name. Emery. Scan complete. Blue. The crystal ball showed blue. That meant he had water affinity. Emery's heart issued a slight jump. He may be special after all. But then the crystal ball halved itself and showed another color. Yellow-green, yellow, earth affinity, and then a third color. Green, plant affinity, a triple affinity. Emery could feel everyone's eyes staring at him. He felt his breath shortening. He somewhat wanted to lower his head and hide underneath the desk. This was the first time he had everyone's attention solely on himself. It actually felt suffocating. Then his ears peaked as he heard gasps of the others. He had his eyes on the floor, but when he looked at them before casting his gaze at the crystal ball, he was as surprised as them. Black, blue, yellow, green, and black. Quadruple affinity. Water, earth, plant, and darkness. A quadruple acolyte. Only one in every 1,000 acolytes have this. Minerva exclaimed with a slight smile. She flew toward Emery and asked, "What's your name, boy?" Emery. Emery stuttered. Minerva recalled the crystal ball since everyone had finished being scanned. "You better work hard, boy. It looks like everyone's done, but don't you guys get excited just yet. Having an affinity for an element isn't enough. Next, we'll see how much your aptitude is." The unassuming boy in a leather jerkin, hailing from a lower-class world, had suddenly become the talk of the class. Emery's classmates stared at him, whispering to one another. Having an affinity for 4 elements was already rare, occurring in only 1 out of 1,000 across hundreds of thousands of human worlds. But among those 4 affinities, he also had a dark element. The odds of this happening were greater than finding a needle in a haystack. Affinity, however, was like having a heavy, closed gate behind which lay countless potentials. One needed the strength to push open that gate and the aptitude to learn what lay beyond. Thus, Minerva's second test was designed to examine both the battle power and the aptitude of each person in her class. This time, she summoned a glowing symbol that resembled an eye and called the class to attention. One by one, each of you will step into the eye of power. Who want to go first? The bald youth, with a light affinity, stepped forward, volunteering to be first. A few seconds after he entered the circle, the eye lit up, revealing numbers emblazoned on the symbol. Battle power, 10. Spirit power, 25. Spirit aptitude, rank A. Minerva addressed the class. Let me explain. Battle power is a measure of one's physical strength. A score of 10 represents the average adult human. For young people to have this score means they have rigorously trained, unlocking their physical potential to the point where they can fight on equal footing with adults, despite their youth. Battle power is determined by a combination of strength, speed, and endurance. Meanwhile, spirit power measures one's ability to weave the elemental energies of the universe. It's based on 3 categories: spirit strength, spirit control, and spirit capacity. Increasing your spirit power will be everyone's main task, but it won't be easy. Only when your spirit power reaches 30 will you be able to use basic elements and advance to a rank 2 acolyte. Lastly, and most importantly, is spirit aptitude, which is your talent for learning magic. Some may have low spirit power because they haven't studied magic, but anyone with high aptitude can quickly catch up. More students took their turns. Battle power, 8. Spirit power, 23. Spirit aptitude, rank A. Battle power, 6. Spirit power, 28. Spirit aptitude, rank A. Battle power, 15. Spirit power, 22. Spirit aptitude, rank A. It was expected that youths chosen from the billions to trillions of people in the galaxy would have rank A spirit aptitude. Battle power, 13. Spirit power, 29. Spirit aptitude, rank S. Battle power, 18. Spirit power, 36. Spirit aptitude, rank A. Battle power, 15. Spirit power, 32. Spirit aptitude, rank S. These were the result from the group of young people in black and white uniforms. A few had rank S aptitude, but nearly all of them had surpassed 30 spirit power, except for a few who hadn't. Those who had were being dubbed geniuses from the Magus world of Kalios, as it meant they could already use magic and were rank 2 acolytes. When a person broke through certain barriers in spirit power, their physical strength would often increase as well. No wonder they're so arrogant. But words are meaningless. Ah, I'm itching to pound those smug faces into the ground, Thrax said, spitting on the floor. Barbarian, could you stop dirtying the place? It only shows you're scared of them, Julian commented, moving the hem of his robe away from where Thrax had spat. Huh? Did you say something, pig? I can't understand a word. All I hear is snorting, Thrax retorted, leaning in mockingly. Julian just sighed, shaking his head and choosing to ignore him again. Those boys, all they know is fighting. I'm so glad that silent boy over there and you, my cutie, aren't like them, Cleus said, inching closer to Emery. Emery muttered, his heart racing, his face flushing. Clea gave a teasing laugh before moving away from him. Suddenly, there were gasps from the crowd. Shamo leaned forward to see what was happening. A girl stepped forward into the eye of power, her greenish-white dress shimmering in the glow of the arcane symbol. The fabric clung to her slender form, flowing smoothly down to her feet like liquid silk. Her face was hidden behind a large, delicate veil that obscured her features, adding an air of mystery to her presence. Despite her concealment, the crowd could feel an aura of quiet strength radiating from her. The numbers flickered into view. Battle power, 22. Spirit power, 41. Spirit aptitude, rank S. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Her battle power was more than twice that of an average adult, but it was her spirit power, an astounding 41, that left many awestruck. At such a young age, she had already ascended to rank 3 acolyte, an achievement that set her apart from the others. Minerva, standing at the front with a knowing smile, gestured to the girl. Let me see your face. The room fell silent, all eyes locked on her. Slowly, with the grace of someone used to commanding attention, the girl reached up and lifted her veil. As the sheer fabric fell away, gasps echoed through the room. Her face was striking, her skin smooth and flawless, her features sharp yet elegant. But it was her eyes that captivated the onlookers. Where the average human iris was round, hers were narrow and elongated, the pupils vertical like a predator's, like a snake's. They gleamed with a dangerous, mesmerizing intensity, a clear sign of her non-human heritage. One of the youths in uniform sneered, breaking the spell of silence. A half-breed bloodline race. No wonder she's different. Minerva shot him a glare, silencing him. What's your name, girl? She asked. I am Silva. The universe was vast, filled with unknown wonders and dangers. Who knew what could be out there? Different races, beasts, cultures, plants, and worlds existed beyond comprehension. The world where Emery and his companions found themselves now belonged to the most advanced human race in the entire galaxy. Comparing it to Earth's current technology would be unfair. Even 1,000 years into the future, Earth's progress wouldn't come close. This world stood at the forefront of understanding the 10 elements, primordial energies said to be the forces of the gods and goddesses that had shaped the universe itself. Yet, despite their advancement in the magical arts, there remained many mysteries still to uncover. Minerva turned her attention back to the examination. Next, she said with a calm but commanding voice. The next few youths to step forward had results that were relatively close to one another. There was a young man who towered over the rest of his peers, achieving a battle power of 24, 2 levels higher than Silva. However, His spirit power was quite low at 22. The others, on average, had a battle power of 10 and a spirit power of 25. Regarding their aptitudes, 1 in every 10 had a rank S rating. It took no more than half an hour before Emery and his group of friends from planet Earth were examined by the Eye of Power. Julian, as usual, spearheaded the group and stepped confidently onto the glowing eye symbol. The moment he made contact, the symbol flashed brightly, and a number emerged from its depths. Battle power, 8. Spirit power, 24. Spirit aptitude, rank A. It was an average figure compared to the others. Aside from his dual affinity, there was nothing particularly special about Julian. He sighed, a look of disappointment washing over his face. Having trained diligently since he was old enough to wield a gladius, he had been quite confident in his physical strength. However, it became clear that the standards of other worlds were much higher than those of Earth. Thrax, on the other hand, wore a smug expression as he walked past Julian, flexing his muscles for dramatic effect. He couldn't resist taunting Julian before the Eye of Power examined him. A pig is a pig. Battle power, 10. Spirit power, 23. Spirit aptitude, rank A. Thrax's eyes widened as he stared at the results. He had seemed to expect a battle power of around 15, but alas, expectations versus reality always brought disappointment. Julian couldn't help but laugh, pointing at Thrax. I guess I shouldn't call you a barbarian anymore. Monkey. Ha ha ha. Somehow, this seemed to cheer up Julian as he continued to chuckle at Thrax's apparent epic fail. Next was Chumo, who entered the circle with his characteristic silence, walking lightly toward the glowing eye. Battle power, 7. Spirit power, 26. Spirit aptitude, rank A. The 3 boys had achieved similar results, which was not surprising, given that Earth was considered a lower-class world. Still, they placed their hopes on their star duo, the exotic, beautiful Clea, who had triple elemental affinities, and Emery, who looked less impressive but possessed 4 elemental affinities. Clea was the first to approach the Eye of Power, winking playfully at her crush. As she stepped onto the glowing symbol, it shone brilliantly and displayed her results. Battle power, 6. Spirit power, 37. Spirit aptitude, rank S. Clea did not disappoint. Murmurs erupted in the crowd, and the youths could be heard discussing how someone from a lower-class world could possess such extraordinary talent. She was a triple elemental magus, boasting both high spirit power and a rank S aptitude. As she descended from the platform, Clea blew a kiss to the crowd. Some of the boys had flushed faces, while the girls wore expressions of envy. It wouldn't take long for Clea to become a rank 3 acolyte, after all. Minerva simply nodded, seemingly satisfied with Clea's performance. She had checked earlier to see which planet Clea hailed from, and having such an outstanding result for someone from a lower-class world was indeed impressive. "You're making us all proud. Beautiful," said Julian, genuinely happy that someone from his world had achieved results higher than the average of all the other worlds. "Of course," Clea replied confidently, flashing another sweet smile in response to Julian's praise. Like the others, she didn't fully understand the significance of the numbers yet. However, seeing how many reacted to her, as if she were a goddess, she felt jubilant to receive such special attention. After Clea, there was only one person left to be tested, Emery. Like the previous examination with the crystal ball, he was the last person to step up to the Eye of Power. The air around them grew tense. Even the sound of each breath could be heard as everyone awaited the results for the only person with 4 elemental affinities. Emery felt uneasy under their stares. He had experienced this type of gaze before, the envious looks from other noble boys when Princess Gwen had shown him attention. It was a stare filled with jealousy. He shook off these thoughts as he ascended the stairs toward the platform. To calm his nerves, he tried to use the trick his father had taught him whenever he felt anxious, imagining the people's faces as fish. Unfortunately, that didn't work, and he shook his head again in frustration. Instead, he repeated to himself that he was special, that having 4 elemental affinities was a monumental achievement. "Emery, are you ready?" Minerva asked. though her expression looked unsure. "Ready," he replied with determination, oblivious to Minerva's concern. Surely he wouldn't score low with 4 affinities, would he? The Eye of Power's symbol shone, and the first set of words appeared. Battle Power, 5. It was the lowest number recorded from all the tests. Indeed, even lower than Clea's, who had a battle power of 6. Emery tried to keep his spirits high, reminding himself that he had inherited a weak constitution from his mother. That was simply a given. Then, the next line appeared, delivering another shock to everyone watching. Spirit Power, 20. This number was also the lowest anyone in the room had seen. Whispers began to circulate, with people baffled that the boy with 4 elemental affinities could have only 20 in spirit power. However, the most shocking revelation was yet to come. When the final text appeared, an uproar ensued. Spirit Aptitude, Rank B. Emery was more shocked than anyone else in the room. He unconsciously glanced at Minerva, whose disappointment seemed to have been half expected. Then it dawned on him. He was the only person with a Rank B Spirit Aptitude. Was he truly the only one in the entire academy to have such a low rating? As Emery thought more about things, the words in his throat got stuck. He was speechless. Was he the odd man out, even in this world? Back on Earth, he was bullied and mocked, and no one had any expectations of him. Even here, he couldn't believe it. This was his chance to become special, but even that was taken from him. He didn't like the attention, for sure, but at least it made him feel good. He felt he had something to show for himself. A quadruple element acolyte appeared in only 1 in 10,000 youths, which included countless worlds with billions to trillions of people. Emery clenched his fists so tightly that they were almost white. He stared at the measurements of the Eye of Power and felt indignant. He asked, his voice shaking, Can I do the T-test again?" Minerva nodded, but her face didn't seem hopeful. The text of Emery's examination erased itself. The Eye of Power shone once more and displayed the same number. When Emery saw Minerva's expression, he knew it was futile. He felt crestfallen. He indeed had the lowest battle power, spirit power, and aptitude in the class. Even though he didn't fully understand what those meant, based on Minerva's face, it was as obvious as clear water how disappointed and surprised she was. Emery could also hear the youths from the upper-class world of Callio's gloating. He vaguely heard remarks like, "It has been 1,000 years since the last Spirit Aptitude Rank B appeared in this academy. This primitive, he truly is one of a kind. Ha ha!" Minerva glanced toward the location of those youths before turning her attention back to Emery. Her expression conveyed that they were right as she said in a heavy tone, "I am sorry, Emery. Spirit Aptitude is the most important factor in becoming a magus. Low spirit power can be enhanced by having high spirit aptitude." She dispelled the Eye of Power before continuing. "But since you're here, I suggest you still do your best." Minerva turned to the others and said, "Everyone, please take a seat for now and listen carefully." The youths returned to their seats, and Emery dragged his feet. Clea, in particular, tried to cheer him up, but it was to no avail. He kept silent and managed a weak smile to somehow acknowledge their efforts. After everyone had taken their seats, Minerva began explaining the importance of aptitude. Having an elemental affinity means you can tap into the energy of the universe because your body is a vessel. Spirit aptitude is how well your vessel circulates the energy of the universe within you. For example, a person who wants to learn how to use water spirit techniques will first need to circulate that energy. The faster and smoother it flows into your body, the better. So, a person with a spirit aptitude of rank S will be able to complete the circulation in 1 day, while those with a spirit aptitude of rank A usually need 3 days, and those with rank B need more than a week. The circulation, however, can only focus on one elemental energy at a time. Hence, people with multiple affinities need to spend more time circulating the energy individually. If you try to circulate 2 or more elements at the same time, the energy in your body could clash, and in the worst-case scenario, your vessel, your body, will explode. Minerva sighed again as she paced around the platform. I'll remind everyone once again, all of you have 7 days. Make sure not to waste this opportunity. She raised 2 fingers. There are 2 things all of you need to complete within these 7 days. First, you have to reach 30 spirit power and become a rank 2 acolyte. Second, you have to get a letter of acceptance from any of the institutions in our Magus Academy. Failure to complete even one of these means you'll fail and your memory will be wiped. After Minerva explained, Emery pieced together the information. Based on her explanation, a spirit aptitude of rank B would take more than 7 days to reach the initial stage of an element. On top of that, he still had to get admitted to one of the institutions and achieve spirit power of 30. The test would occur in 7 days, so the only conclusion anyone would reach was that Emery would fail. Emery was watching Minerva when he noticed several young people from Kalios in the front row turning their heads. He could feel them talking about him, gloating and mocking. They were the ones who had first shown expressions of jealousy, but now their noses were in the air, adorned with expressions of scorn or pity. He looked down again, staring blankly at the floor, but his thoughts were shaken when someone suddenly placed an arm over his shoulder. A sweet fragrance filled his senses as a soft, warm feeling pressed against his arm. "Don't worry, cutie. I'll help you. Maybe it's because of the things our high priest taught me that I have such high spirit power. I'll teach you some of those tricks." It took him a moment to realize that it was Clea who had placed her arm around him. He quickly pulled away from her embrace. "Since we're from the same world, I'll also help you, Emery," commented Julian, who was sitting in the farthest corner. "Clea, Julian, HMPFF," snorted Thrax, but his eyes clearly said otherwise. Shumo remained silent, but his gaze held a hint of warmth. Emery felt a warmth inside. They had barely known each other, but these people acted better than those mean, noble kids back in the kingdom he belonged to. These were the first people to show him any care other than Gwen. The kids in his father's estate always maintained a certain distance from him. But these 4 strangers, whom he had met in a different world, seemed genuine. Emery turned his attention back to Minerva, who was still explaining a few things. Somehow, those negative thoughts faded from his mind. In Magus Academy, even though we have many institutions, they will not accept an acolyte if you simply show up and ask to be enrolled. This academy isn't a place for begging. Prove your worth by meeting their requirements, and they will provide you with the facilities and lessons they can offer. Minerva waved her hand, and colossal magical images of 2 doors appeared. The institutions we have are divided into 2 main paths, the 10 Elements path and the Destiny path. The 10 Elements path consists of institutions where you will improve your spirit power as well as learn about your elements. Since it is a given that all students we gather from different worlds have at least 1 element, all of you are entitled to take the entrance test for their classes. You can only take the test according to your elemental affinity. For example, if you have a single elemental affinity, such as fire, you can take the test for our Fire Academy, but not for the others. The Destiny path then glowed, and Minerva continued. The Destiny path consists of institutions for those who are interested in learning a particular field of expertise. The common institutions are destruction, illusion, conjuration, alteration, alchemy, combat, and many others. All of them require tests you must pass before taking their classes, except for the combat class. Another way to enter these institutions is through a letter of recommendation or a personal invitation from a person of authority within them. All of this talk must be making all of you bored by now, so let's wrap this up. I'd like for everyone to focus on the symbols on their hands. Emery focused his thoughts on the symbol on his palm. The symbols, formed of lines and writing he did not understand, emitted information. Emery, male, 15 years old. Battle power, 5. Spirit power, 20. Spirit aptitude, B. You are invited to take the entrance exams in 4 schools of the 10 Elemental Path: Water Institute, Earth Institute, Plant Institute, and Darkness Institute. No messages received from any school onto the Destiny Path. Minerva clapped her hands, regaining everyone's attention. This is the end of our class. All of you can start taking your tests, and day 1 begins tomorrow. Right now, everyone may rest and prepare in your living quarters. Just follow the instructions of the guard outside the portal. I wish you all success. Class is dismissed. After the class ended, everyone stood up and made their way to the back where the portal was located. They arrived at the same spot as before, and the man in black and gold armor was still standing there. He then directed the rest of the class toward another portal. When they entered it, they arrived in a large square plaza with a big fountain in the middle. The fountain was located at the center, with paths heading toward 10 buildings in different directions. The area had arches, trees, bushes, benches, and small pagodas, where some people were already sitting and chatting away. Emery noticed that the edge of the plaza seemed to be an empty space, except for the fences. When he went to the edge, he discovered that they were in a location where everything was floating. That building over there is Building 7. Classes 70 to 79 will be staying there for the next 7 days, said another man in the same suit of armor. Emery counted the number of buildings in front of him. 6, 7, 10. Looks like we'll all be living in this place together. Wow, this place is so beautiful, said Clea, as she sat on one of the stone-white benches beneath a nearby tree that provided shade. Let's go, said their guide. They were led to one of the floating paths. After entering, a large hall with a long table welcomed them. A person who didn't look much older than they were greeted the new arrivals. He wore a tight black suit that covered up to his neck, appearing to be some sort of uniform. Welcome, new acolytes, to Sky Island 7. Call me Uriel. I'm a rank 6 acolyte. All the facilities here are open to you. That includes a place to eat, baths, training rooms, and beds. All are provided for free. In return, we ask that you do your best in your classes for the sake of humanity. Uniforms are required to be worn at all times, and you will find them once you've arrived in your rooms. The residence is divided according to the information visible in the symbol on the palm of your hand. Access to the institution of your choice will be open tomorrow morning. Hundreds of young people began to move toward a hallway, ascending several stairs and passing through passages until they finally arrived at their residence. They followed the directions provided by the symbols on their palms. Emery and his friends soon came to a large door. Julian stepped forward, placing his palm on the surface of the door. It glowed and hissed open. Inside the room were an additional 5 rooms with beds that had a simplistic design. Each room had a large window offering a beautiful view of the sky. Wow, I love it, said Clea. Welcome. A small crystal descended from above the ceiling of the room and floated in the center. I am your room attendant. I can answer all questions about this place or prepare your needs according to the level of your access. The 5 young people couldn't help but marvel at the new world they were entering. It felt like they were in a place built by the gods. Kindly wear your acolyte uniforms first. The empty space in front of them was slightly distorted, and a cloak appeared. It was the same cloak that Uriel was wearing, but it had a badge on the side with different numbers. We have to wear this weird dress, said Thrax, as he waved it around. Typical barbarian, you'd certainly want to go around naked, replied Julian. Emery sighed as the two began arguing again. However, they suddenly stopped as their eyes widened in surprise. Chumo also cleared his throat slightly. What's up, Chumo? Emery asked before shifting his gaze to where Chumo, Julian, and Thrax were looking. Then he found Clea casually removing her accessories and dress. She had her back to them, but the 3 boys were transfixed as they stared at her smooth, flawless bronze skin and curves while she tried on the clothes provided by the room attendant. The room fell silent. Only their breathing, gulping, and the rustling of Clea's clothes could be heard. Wow, what a beautiful outfit. The fabric feels so cool, and the air passes through easily. You guys should also try it, said Clea after finishing putting on the clothes. Julian and Thrax were used to living in a vulgar environment, but what they had seen couldn't compare to Clea's natural charm. As for Emery and Chumo, they were still flustered from the sight they had just witnessed. Clea acted as if this were a normal occurrence for her. The other boys went inside their rooms first, changed clothes, and returned to the middle of the room, where the little crystal explained common things as well as information about all the institutions they could attend the next day. Even though Emery had access to participate in the 4 elemental institutions, he did not receive any invitation from the Destiny Path. The same was true for Julian, Thrax, and Chummo. None of them had received any invitations yet, except for the Elemental Path School. It was their first day, after all, so their expertise had not yet been assessed by the Destiny Path School. "You'll be fine, Emery. Why don't you come with me tomorrow? We both have an affinity for Earth?" asked Julian. For me, combat is everything. But I should try fire first," exclaimed Thrax. Chummo remained silent. He didn't say much, even though everyone noticed that he was following their conversation closely. "What about you, Clea?" asked Julian. Actually, Clea looks confused while checking the information from the crystal. She was a little surprised to see she had 5 invitations from 5 different Destiny Path institutions. With the 3 elemental institutions she had, that totaled 8 institutions in 7 days. She was confused about which one she should. The shadow of night soon took over the orange sky. This strange world still had a day and night cycle. It had been such a weird and rough day, especially for Emery, that most of them still needed to rest in their private rooms and reflect on today's events. Emery sat on his bed, gazing through the window. If he looked above, thousands of stars covered the canvas of a night sky, and he wished that his father was one of the stars. If he looked below, the clouds were rich and fluffy. He lay his head on the pillow, which was softer than anything he had ever rested on. Staring at the ceiling, various thoughts entered Emery's mind. The events that transpired today were too real to hope that everything was just a dream. His first thoughts were the day's exam on elemental affinities and spirit aptitude in this magical world. Clea, Julian, Thrax, Chummo, and Gwen came next, followed by memories of the freezing river, the burning of his father's estate, and lastly, his father. The death of his father was just starting to sink in. Tears began to well up in his eyes again, but Emery quickly wiped them away. He shouldn't be such a crybaby, he thought to himself. He turned to the side, staring at the night sky with his eyes urging him to shut. Then the faces of those marauders appeared in his mind, along with the word Cruton. He had to know what that meant and honor his father by not letting his death be in vain. He had to do something. Avenging his father would be the way. His fists clenched as the final moments of his father replayed in his mind over and over until he finally fell asleep. Suddenly, there was a series of knocks on the door, waking Emery up. Emery, wake up." The sweet voice belonged to a girl. He grunted, but the soft, comfortable bed felt like a spell, making him want to sleep a bit longer. Emery muttered, "Gwen." Then the door hissed open, and footsteps got closer to his bed. The bedsheet was pulled from his grasp, and the sweet voice turned sharp as she said, "What did you say my name was? Get up. We have to get ready. The acolytes need to gather in the assembly." Acolyte. Emery half opened his eyes, confused. It took him a moment to figure out where he was, who this girl was, and what the word acolyte meant. He was still in that strange world. If so, then everything that had happened was real, and this was his reality. Emery shook his head, trying to shake off his half-asleep state. He stretched his stiff muscles, and as he turned to the window, it transformed to reveal the beautiful blue sky and the rich clouds below. Standing before the window, he reflected on last night's thoughts, realizing that to accomplish what he needed to do, he first needed to become stronger here and pass the test. Emery exited his room, and the rest of the boys were also getting ready. Clea, on the other hand, had already put on her uniform. "Who is Gwen?" she asked, resting her chin on her palms. Who? My cutie here already has a lover, I see. So, is that why you're keeping your distance from me?" teased Clea as she leaned closer to Emery. "Oh no, we're not lovers. We are just Emery stopped, remembering that night in the garden when Gwen had given him a complicated look and remarked that they couldn't be friends anymore. "You know, I don't really mind that," said the charming girl, playfully tapping his nose before leaving him to his thoughts. Emery didn't understand what she meant, so he pushed it to the back of his mind. After taking a bath in another room, Emery went to their common area and found something to eat. The food on the table was colorful but bean-sized. Surprisingly, eating just a few filled his hunger. After that, Emery put on his uniform and headed straight to the plaza where the fountain was, along with his 4 friends. They talked on the way, and Emery decided to go with Julian to check out the Earth Element Institute. As for the others, Clea would be visiting the Wind Element Institute, Thrax the Fire Element Institute, and Shumo the Darkness Element Institute. The assembly in the main plaza was just a greeting, and the acolytes were then permitted to go wherever they wanted. Since Emery and Julian already had a plan, the two entered a portal with yellow rings around it, along with dozens of other young people. They passed through the gate, and what welcomed them first was the wind's breeze, carrying grains of sand that hit their faces. Emery looked around. This was the first time he had seen a place like this. The sand beneath his feet felt reminiscent of a beach, but no bodies of water could be seen. In our world, this is called a desert, said Julian. A desert. This was the first time Emery had seen such a place. The cool breeze, the sun's glare, a vast empty space behind them, the grains of sand beneath his feet. Funnily enough, this place looked like it would be scorching, but that wasn't the case. In front of them was a large sign made out of limestone that said, "Welcome to Animus." There are thousands of young people walking around in every direction, going into tall, straight houses also made of limestone. It was a bustling institute. What really caught Emery and Julian's eye, though, was the colossal yellow pillar in the middle. If they would both have to guess, that's their destination. On the way, Julian couldn't help but notice the abundance of people and statues everywhere. "There must be thousands of people in this place," he commented. "It looks like the earth element is the most abundant affinity amongst everyone." Emery nodded in agreement. Soon enough, they arrived in front of the pillar that towered over the whole place. There were people gathering atop a 100-step staircase. Emery sighed and massaged his temple. He was already out of breath from walking on what felt like trudging through mud. It took almost half an hour before Emery reached the top of the staircase where there were hundreds of new acolytes just like him. He saw some familiar faces who had received the same elemental affinity in Minerva's class hall, but a particular person, though, got his attention. That person was also wearing a similar uniform, but it was more of a robe. His aura, though, was what set him apart. It felt like he was someone whom you could depend on. Then that person lifted his hood with his big, calloused hands. Even though he had a serious face coupled in short hair, making him look strict, there was that sense of familiarity. The Magus introduced himself. "Welcome. My name is Darius, an Earth Lord Magus, and I'll be your guide during these 7 days. My goal for all of you is to make sure you have sufficient understanding of the strongest element in the universe." "Strongest?" a boy in the front said with a face full of doubt. In fact, it wasn't only that boy, but a lot of the acolytes, including Emery and Julian, thought the same. Darius laughed and smiled before saying, "Well then, let me clear your doubts." He then made several gestures with his hand before placing his palm on the large rock sitting next to him. The large rock shook and restructured itself, turning into a giant human-shaped rock like the statues Emery and Julian had seen on their way here. The stone monster moved and offered its hand to Darius, and Darius made his way to the stone monster's shoulder. Darius said, "Indeed, fire could turn cities into ashes. Water could turn peaceful waves into terrifying tsunamis that could sweep an entire forest to become bare. Lighting could eliminate lives in a blink of an eye, and wind could change the gentle breeze into swirling tornadoes as sharp as swords. But earth, the land, life sprang from the ground, and to the ground is where all life shall return. Our institute is known as the strongest that could withstand all. Other cities, worlds may fall for they don't have our wall that protects all, Titan's shield. Ours is a shield that stands against the heavenly fires, tsunami, thousands of thunderbolts, and hurricanes." Emery stood in awe as he imagined the natural disasters still unable to break against the earth itself. He wondered if he could learn that, then he would not fear any knife, blade, fire, etc., any threat against his life. Darius continued, "Make no mistake, however, the earth element isn't only to defend oneself. We also have a spell that can pull an unimaginable force of destruction that could threaten all life in one world. In fact, this spell was so terrible that it wiped out the previous inhabitants of a whole world." "Whoa. Could you tell us more about that?" asked a boy in the front. "I'm afraid that's all I can tell you." We don't want you now learning a spell to wipe out a whole world, do we? Said Darius with a smile. Emery also had half a smile as he listened to Darius explain a whole bunch of things. Even though Darius had a serious-looking face, the aura he emitted made a person listen in and enjoy. Darius explained while descending from the stone human shoulder. The 10 elements have all their own defense, attack, and assistive spells. But what sets the earth element is so simple. The acolytes seemed to squeeze and eager to listen to Darius' words. The basic and first step for a magus to learn is to be aware of your surroundings. We channel the energies of the gods and goddesses in our bodies to move the external world. For example, in order to use water spells, you need to have water near you. Thus, water element magi are strong when channeling in large bodies of water. Same with fire magi. They're strongest in places where the heat is abundant. As for the earth element, it is everywhere. The ground you stand on is earth, and we spend 95% of our time standing on earth. And this is the reason why my new acolytes, earth element is the strongest among the others. Emery and Julian subconsciously nodded in agreement. Darius' explanation made a lot of sense, so they couldn't wait to learn in this place. Darius then turned the stone human to its original form when a woman wearing the same magus robes as him approached while clapping. You're becoming more eloquent as each year passes by, Darius. I am impressed, said the woman. Of course, Felicia, these youths are the future. I need to inspire these youth for the sake of humanity, and I truly believe our earth element is the solution. The more talented acolytes join the Earth Institution, the better, replied Darius. Felicia said, Okay, I'm not here to lecture you or anything. Now let's get to business. Let's see how many of them are qualified today. Let's enter the pillar, everyone. Darius exclaimed to the young acolytes. Hundreds to thousands of acolytes walked into the gigantic pillar. The main hall was massive, and there were also hundreds of people moving up and about. They moved toward the large gate at the end of the hall. Emery and Julian chatted, but then everybody stopped all as they all felt something, a force that made their steps heavier. Emery, can you feel that? Julian asked Emery in confusion. Yes, it feels like my whole body is being pushed down. What do you think is happening? Emery said, I'm just clueless as you know, said Julian, also having difficulties walking but faring much better than Emery. Arriving at the large closed stone gate, Darius slightly bowed before turning around and saying, The people who have elemental affinity with Earth will get a benefit from this place. I'm sure all of you have experienced the invisible force pushing down on you by now. The longer you're staying in this place, the better is your talent in channeling the energy of the Earth. I urge each one of you to come here every day so that you'll become a great magus in the future. Forget the other elements you have. He placed his hand behind his back and continued, Behind this gate lies a rock that is the origin of the stone element spirit. Everyone can enter this gate to gather and channel earth energy so that you'll improve your knowledge of the earth. However, for a first-year acolyte, each of you can only train inside this room for half a day. Darius then formed various gestures with his hands, and a stone sprang beside him as tall as him. If you can move this stone, then you'll be deemed as passed and receive acceptance as an acolyte for the Institute of Stone. Several confident youths went over the stone Darius made and pushed it, but it didn't budge. Darius laughed. Did you think it would be that easy? Now enter the room and train your elemental energy. The closer you are to the origin stone, the faster you'll learn. After Darius said that, the ground beneath their feet rumbled as the closed stone gate opened itself. Emery and Julian entered along with the crowd, and even though there were like 1,000 of them, there was more than ample space for everyone to take a seat by themselves. At the far side of the room, stuck to the wall, was a small piece of a pitch-black rock floating on top of 3 platforms. Emery walked slowly with Julian beside him. He was starting to feel out of breath because each step he took felt like scaling a mountain. After the 11th step, Emery felt like there's a huge wall preventing him from getting closer, so he sat cross-legged while Julian moved closer to the rock. Emery closed his eyes and concentrated on catching his breath first. He then focused his mind on the black stone, and a voice entered his mind. Emery kept his eyes closed and thought about the black stone more. In the darkness of his mind, it felt like he was the only one, and the black rock appeared in front of him. The black rock emitted a faint yellow light and formed the following words: "Calm thy mind, be one with earth. Steadfast thy heart, unmoved, unshaken. Be one with earth." "What does it mean?" muttered Emery to himself, when the black rock in his mind suddenly enlarged itself, making him feel like being swallowed. He wanted to open his eyes, but then he remembered the next words: "Steadfast thy heart, unmoved, unshaken." Emery forced himself to calm down and not panic. That was the clue. He remained seated, steady as the large black rock grew larger and larger, as big as a mountain, until it finally swallowed him. Emery felt the energy of the earth around him and was starting to lose his sense of self. "Time's up," Darius exclaimed. Emery then opened his eyes, sweat dripping from his forehead. Without realizing it, they all had spent half a day sitting in front of the rock. Emery waited for Julian to arrive and asked, "What happened?" "Truly extraordinary," Julian said with a beam on his face while also dripping with sweat. All acolytes exited the room. Some looked excited and some looked exhausted. After returning in front of the stone gate, Darius called their attention and made dozens of stones like the one he had made and asked them to move the stones. A confident acolyte stepped forward first and placed his palm in front of the stone. The stone shook. Darius smiled and said, "Excellent. Those who can move this stone will be considered an acolyte of the Institute of Stone. Those who are still unable to move it will need to train more. Could I have everyone check their palms first?" Emery focused his thoughts on the circle with a line in the middle. Emery, male, 15 years. Battle power, 5. Spirit power, 21. Received basic earth spirit cultivation technique. New information appeared in his mind. It is the manual on the earth spirit cultivation technique. But there was one thing that caught his eye the most. Emery had spent half a day focusing on the stone, and his spirit power increased by 1 point. His heart jumped with joy, even if it was just 1 point. He gave it a thought and came to a realization. This was like mastering a skill. The more he practiced a skill, then the comprehension would increase. Wouldn't that mean the spirit power also would improve a lot faster? Just as he was thinking more and more, Julian exclaimed, "This is amazing. I just looked at my spirit power go up by 3. In half a day, I'm 3 points shy from 30. The word 3-point took away Emery's joy of receiving 1 point. Alas, a short 10-second of happiness, but still Emery was joyful that Julian also had a fruitful time. That's great. Emery sighed at the aspect of accepting reality. Julian and the rest who were studying along with him in the earth elemental spirit were more talented than him. However, he knew he shouldn't let that get him down. He just needed to work harder than the others, like his father had always said to him whenever he practiced the sword. In the first trial, about 40 acolytes out of the thousands were successful in moving the stones. Making it move looked easy because one would only have to push the rock even by a small margin, and they'd be accepted as an acolyte for the Institute of Stone, but considering how only a few of them had succeeded, it wasn't as simple as pushing it with all of their strength. Hundreds of acolytes attempted during the course of the day, and some were able to make it shake, but shaking it wasn't enough, for it didn't budge even 1 millimeter from its place. So, some of those who had failed sat again and pondered the manual imprinted in the palm of their hands and channeled the energy of stone of origin seeping out from the stone gate. At the end of the day, around 100 acolytes succeeded in moving the stones. Julian and Emery, on the other hand, weren't successful despite also studying and channeling the energy of the earth after attempting to push the rocks. Based on their observation, though, since there were only 100 that succeeded on the first day, they must be acolytes who had a spirit aptitude of rank S. The sky was becoming orange, signaling the end of the day when all the remaining acolytes who failed were asked to return to their respective sky islands. Emery and Julian arrived in their room and found Thrax, Chumo, and Clea also resting in the common area. "How was your day, guys? Did any of you succeed on the first day?" asked Julian, waving his hand. Thrax ignored Julian, not interested in answering even one bit. But based on how Thrax had his lips crooked downwards and brows furrowed, Emery and Julian knew Thrax hadn't passed his initial test in the Institute of Flames. Chomo was still silent as ever, but he responded with a shake of his head, which was more than enough to tell how he also hadn't succeeded yet. Emery and Julian looked at Clea, who was the last to answer, and said the following in her sweet, unbothered tone. Me? Of course, I succeeded. She opened her hand and generated a swirling small whirlpool on the top of her palm. It looked just like Minerva's ball of wind, but Clea's was much smaller. You're great, Clea, Emery exclaimed, leaning closer to take a look at Clea's hand. I appreciate you praising me, cutie. But what about the two of you? Did either one of you succeed? She asked after dispelling the small whirlpool. Emery shrugged. Not yet, but I'll try again tomorrow. Clea nodded. Okay, if at first you don't succeed, then try again and do better on the second time. She then gave a sharp look at Julian. If that stupid Julian makes it difficult for you or other people, you better let me know. I'll finish them. Julian laughed awkwardly, scratching his head. You're kidding, right? Clea? Ha ha ha. Clea had the highest spirit power level amongst all of them, and on just one day, she had improved leaps and bound ahead of them. So Julian didn't dare to mess around with her. The next day came, and Emery returned to the same institution with Julian the first thing in the morning. They wanted to practice channeling the Earth's energy once more in the stone or origin room, but like what Darius had said, first-year acolytes could only use this room for only half a day. That meant only once during the 7 days because the priority for this room was reserved for the senior acolytes. Emery was disappointed because he could feel he was close to having a breakthrough in his understanding of the Earth's energy. A little more of that push was all he needed. Still, he and Julian had trained outside the stone gate, though, and the pushing force from the origin of stone could still be felt the closer they were to the stone gate. So they decided to study the manual and channel the elemental energy of the earth on the spot once more. They sat cross-legged and focused their mind, but since this area was also where the other acolytes were taking the test of moving the stone, their focus was sometimes broken whenever a youth got accepted in the Institute of Stone. There were fewer people than yesterday because half of the acolytes had already passed and got accepted and were moved to a different area. It was already late in the afternoon when Emery opened his eyes. He wiped his sweating forehead, first with his arm before looking at his palm. The spirit power increased by another point. He was somewhat satisfied. He thought whether he should continue here or take advantage of the other institutes he had an affinity with when Julian shot up from the ground shouting, "That's it. I got it." Julian hurried to the big rock, placed both hands on the stone, and pushed it with all his strength to the point where veins in his head were starting to pop out. A faint yellow glow appeared on his hand, and then the stone finally moved. Well done. Welcome to the Institute of Stone, young lad, said Darius, who was watching over them. Julian punched the air with a big grin on his face. He did in fact have a breakthrough in the initial stage of Earth Spirit cultivation, plus his spirit power had reached 30 after breaking through. He leaned in close to Emery and said almost in a whisper, "Do you want to know how I succeeded, Emery?" Emery, however, had no hesitation in his answer, "No." Julian's eyebrows twitched and followed up, "Why not?" Emery looked at Julian with all seriousness and said, "Because if you teach me the trick, then how will I ever improve? I appreciate your offer, but I need to figure this out. I can't keep being a burden to others. Manning up now, aren't you?" Julian teased Emery before adding, "I am glad for you. For now, I'll go back and mess with that barbarian." "Ha ha." Emery nodded and looked around. Out of the thousands who had initially come with him and Julian, there seemed to be only a third left of the original examinees still focusing and channeling the Earth's energy. He also noticed it was getting dark as Julian walked away, but he wasn't about to go home. He had given a thought about what happened to him last night and could only come up with one answer. If only he was strong and confident like Julian, then maybe he could have saved his father from those damn marauders. Emery didn't say another word and determined himself to keep on training throughout the night. He wasn't alone, though, as there were hundreds of acolytes not budging from their positions as well. From time to time, these other youths also opened their eyes to know what was happening around them. They had realized they were the bottom third of the group, and because of not wanting to lose face, these youths encouraged themselves to try harder. Darius and Felicia were sitting on top of the stones they had made for themselves with smiles on their faces. "We were just like them, don't you remember?" said Darius, warmly. Felicia responded with her eyes widened. "Huh, what are you talking about? I remember that you were always that lazy, all-talk acolyte in our class." Darius simply laughed and said, nostalgia." The night of the second day passed. The third morning sun arrived. Hundreds of acolytes were entering the pillar once more, and Julian arrived along with the crowd. He made his way toward Emery and raised his hand to wave. He was about to speak, but when he saw how Emery was fully immersed, Julian refrained from disturbing Emery and followed Darius into another room where the rest of the acolytes who had passed the initial test were training. The moment Julian left, Emery opened his eyes. Emery had felt the presence of the new arrives, so his concentration was broken. He searched his surroundings, trying to find a familiar face, and there were only a few people left whom he could recognize from last night. Most of them were new youths, and he could tell they were new because they were given the opportunity to enter the hall behind the stone gate where the Stone of Origin was stored. So, these people must be acolytes who also had multiple affinities. Emery knew he was at his limit. The mental exhaustion of staying still in his dark mind, where the large black rock swallowing him was taxing not only to his mind but to his body as well, even more so if you consider how weak his constitution was. He closed his eyes and focused once more, pushing himself to the absolute limit, but the large black rock no longer appeared. He tried again and again, but it was just complete darkness with him in the middle. He couldn't focus anymore. What felt like a moment for Emery, however, was actually an hour had already passed. He looked around and no longer saw anyone from his group. All that was left were new faces who had just joined today. He was the only one who hadn't succeeded in mastering the basic earth spirit cultivation technique. He was half expecting for this to be the case, though, but he had to at least try. Nothing would be earned if he didn't push himself, for he had a spirit aptitude rank B+ 4 affinities, which made it more difficult the other elements according to Minerva. Emery summoned his status from his palm. Emery Ambrose, 15 years old. Battle power 5. Spirit power 22. Since the increase of 2 points in total, including the one from the other day, his spirit power hadn't increased despite spending the whole night. Emery sighed from disappointment, as it felt like the time he had spent was fruitless. The more he forced himself to understand the meaning of the words "calm thy mind, be one with the earth, steadfast thy heart," unmoved, unshaken, the less he understood. Emery was still trying to think about those words when the training in the next room was over and Darius realized Emery had still not finished comprehending the manual. Felicia says to Darius, "That kid's still not done with comprehending the basic stage. Apparently that kid has a spirit aptitude rank B. Rank B. It's been a long time since we received Acolyte with aptitude B. Was there a mistake? That shouldn't be the case. The election is directly monitored by the Grand Magus." Darius swiped the bracelet on his wrist and looked up Emery's information. The battle power and spirit power are very low. For affinities, but indeed is true. It's a shame his aptitude is so lacking that he'll experience a lot of obstacles. Felicia nodded and glanced at Emery. Yes, if he were in another Magus Academy, rank B with 4 affinities would be like a gift sent from the gods. It is unfortunate, though, that ours is the highest Magus Academy in the galaxy. He'll not succeed on the 7th day. Felicia, we have overseen hundreds of thousands of acolytes. You should know by now that spirit aptitude isn't everything. I find this child admirable. Darius walked up to Emery and said, "Kid, don't forget that your body is a vessel where the energy of the universe flows. It won't help if you push yourself to the point of exhaustion. Go back and rest." "Understand. Thank you for the advice," said Emery as he tried to stand up before falling down because his legs had become numb from sitting cross-legged so long that it felt like hundreds of needles were stabbing it at the same time. Julian, who also had just gotten out of the other training, ran over to Emery and helped. "I appreciate it, Julian," weakly said Emery. The two walked away and went through the portal, and that was when they saw Clea, Thrax, and Chumo waiting for Julian and Emery. When Clea had heard about Emery not returning the knight from Julian, she had wanted to go to the Institute of Stone and pick him up. But Julian had convinced her not to do that, so Clea had restrained herself from picking up Emery. Emery had stayed up all night without food and rest. He needed to eat and sleep. Clea had heard from Julian about Emery's obstacle. Clea forced everyone to accompany her to dinner in the dining room with the Sky Building. "Emery, don't worry, we still have 4 days." "You can do it," said Julian. "Yes, Emery, you can do it," encouraged Clea. Even though Thrax and Chumo didn't talk much, they were there at the dining table together. Emery could see their gesture and made his spirit recover. As they were chatting away, 5 youths approached their table. It didn't take long for Emery's group to identify who these people were. Their arrogant faces, noses up in the air, they were acolytes who had come from Kalios, a Magus world. "TCH, I heard he's the only one in this prestigious Magus Academy's history who couldn't finish the basics in 3 days. Ha! It's not surprising results for a lowly acolyte from a lower-class world. He's more like a monkey, an acolyte monkey with a rank B. Ha ha ha. The thought of this primitive, lower-class world chosen as an acolyte in this academy. Even my pet is more deserving of being elected in this place than him." Bam! The table shook while the utensils and food spilled over. The big-bodied Thrax had slammed it before standing up and faced the Kalios boy. Julian also didn't remain silent and stood side by side with Thrax. "Roman, you sit down. I'll teach this pig snout a lesson with my fist," roared Thrax, cracking his fist, teeth clenched. Undeterred, Julian replied, "I'm here to make sure you don't embarrass us, Thracian." The other acolytes who were eating looked toward Emery's table. Some stood up, stretching their heads among the gathering crowd. "We'll fight. Come on, fight. I want to see some blood. I hope someone dies. That'll make it more exciting." Fighting between acolytes weren't prohibited, but killing or rendering a fellow acolyte permanently disabled was punishable according to the Academy's regulation. The reason why duels or fighting was still acceptable to a certain degree was that it could pave the way to becoming a stronger acolyte. "Huh, you dare. A frog at the bottom of a well doesn't really know how high the sky is. You trash," spat the acolyte in front of Thrax's face. Thrax pushed the Kalios boy and readied his fist. He was a man of honor and was trained to never back down and give up. On this 3rd day, he had succeeded in mastering the basic spirit of the fire element and believed he could take down this arrogant boy. He actually hadn't mastered a spell yet, but he had some understanding and preferred to pummel this pretty boy's face with just his fist. He was about to jump over it and pin the boy to the ground, but his leg became frozen. He couldn't move. "I don't need you to interfere," said the blonde-haired pretty boy on the ground to his friends. He had used his understanding of the ice element and had frozen Thrax's leg. Thrax struggled to free himself, but he was stuck on the ground. The blonde ice element acolyte hurled another ice spell toward Thrax's immobile body and tried to get up. Thrax had heated up his body with his understanding of the elemental fire, vaporizing the ice on his leg, but he was too late. The ice bullet was only an inch away from him when Julian placed his arm in the path of the ice bullet, preventing it from reaching Thrax. Julian pulled back his uninjured arm that was emitting a faint yellow glow. Stone skin. This was the spell Julian had mastered after comprehending the basic earth spirit cultivation technique and training with Darius. But since he had just acquired that spell, Julian could only turn the skin on his arm as hard as a rock. Transforming the skin into a rock made him not feel any pain, but the freezing properties of the ice spell still affected Julian's stone arm, so that even if it was not injured, it had become frozen and Julian couldn't move his fingers. The acolytes from Kalios laughed and mocked the ones who had come from Earth. "Ha ha! Ignorance sure is a bliss, you primitive monkeys." Julian's arm formed chunks of ice like Thrax's legs. He waved his arm, but it was for naught as it was truly frozen. If Julian had used his stone skin spell against a different element attack like fire, sharp, or blunt force, the stone skin would have worked, but it wasn't effective against the ice bullet, which was its main strength was to freeze. Emery, Clea, and Chumo also stood up, for they couldn't just stand by and watch Thrax and Julian fight for them. The acolyte formed another ice bullet directed to Julian. Ice bullet. Julian blocked it with his other arm, and the freezing properties of the ice bullet made both of his arms unusable. Thrax didn't stay still and crushed the melting ice on one of his legs with a punch, shattering the chunks of ice into millions of pieces on the ground. The pretty boy acolyte raised both of his hands in the direction of Thrax and Julian, forming another ice bullets. It looked like he intended to freeze both of them from head to toe at the same time. Ice bullet, ice bullet. Emery had seen how the ice bullet came into contact with Julian's second arm. Could it be perhaps what he was thinking? But there was no time to think more about it, as the acolyte's ice bullet was about to touch Thrax and Julian. He quickly grabbed the bowl and spoon on the table and threw it at the projectiles. The two items came into contact with the bullets in the air and froze both the bowl and spoon before falling on the ground. Emery made a fist at the conjecture he had made and saved Thrax and Julian from being fully frozen. "Nice one, Emery," exclaimed Clea. Since Emery had interfered, the two acolytes from Kalios nodded to each other and came forward readying their spells when a great wind pushed the two of them, including the blonde acolyte, 3 steps back. "Gust of wind," Clea had shouted. It was her spell. The 3 acolytes were surprised for a few seconds before recollecting themselves. They were about to reply in kind with their spells when a purple spark ignited from Clea's palm. Clea waved her hand and said, "Lightning arrow." The spark of electricity shot from Clea's hand and precisely destroyed the ice that had frozen Thrax's other leg and both of Julian's arms. The acolytes from Kalios looked surprised, and the blonde boy muttered, "2 spells already. It's only the 3rd day, and this girl is able to use spells from 2 different affinities." They then stopped their spells and suddenly looked at each other, seemingly discussing and nodding amongst themselves while glancing at Clea from time to time. The arrogant blonde boy, who seemed to their leader, said, "We'll let you guys off this time. Let's just say we're suddenly feeling generous today." He turned around and bumped into Chumo, standing behind them. No one had noticed how Chumo, the black-haired boy, with his hair tied to a bun, managed to get around them, even the onlookers. All they knew was that Chumo just suddenly appeared at the back of the blonde-haired boy. A large crowd had gathered, but the battle was over as the acolytes from Kalios walked away. If they had continued, Emery and his friends would most likely lose. And even though they had managed to prevent the youths of Kalios from humiliating them, in the end, if it weren't for Clea, they would have most likely lost the fight. Yesterday's fight in the cafeteria had greatly upset Thrax. Even after arriving at their private quarters, he was slamming doors, stomping his feet, and kept on saying if he had mastered one of the fire spells, or at least had a weapon in hand, he would have taught those arrogant sons of bitches a lesson they'd never forget. Hence, Thrax had decided to visit the Institute of Combat and invited the others to come with him last night, who all had accepted, except for Clea, who still had a lot of invitations from other institutes that caught her attention the most. Thrax, in fact, had been talking about wanting to check out the Institute of Combat since day one during their discussions on the previous nights, but hadn't had the chance to attend it because he didn't want Julian to one-up him by being ahead in spiritual comprehension. The next morning came and Emery got ready with the boys. Actually, he wanted to try and deepen his comprehension in the basic earth spirit cultivation technique, since he had invested 3 days already in it, but after considering Magus Darius' advice not to push himself, Emery removed that thought in his head and focused on the Institute of Combat, especially in his heart. He had always wanted to become one of those great knights waving the sword that would have also made his father proud. The 4 boys came out of their private quarters, passed through the portal in the Fountain Plaza, and were surprised to see how different this place looked, except perhaps for Emery, who felt like this place was reminiscent of his kingdom's aesthetics. Gray bricks painted the walls of most of the buildings, rooftops either scarlet red or azure blue, and tall towers higher than the castle in the Lioness Kingdom. This place was also bustling with crowds, and the buildings were all bunched up together, creating a tight network of streets, alleys, stairs leading up and down to God knows where, that could make a person feel like they'd get lost after taking one wrong turn the corner. Luckily, they noticed a large group of acolytes wearing a different kind of uniform that looked more like a suit of armor and started following them until arriving at a giant building with large signages of a sword, spear, hammer, bow and arrow, dagger, shield, and fist placed accordingly on the spacious gray wall. Thrax made his way first inside with the others not far behind, passing through two massive open doors with two guards standing on both ends of the doors, and spoke to a green-haired woman with big round spectacles. She said in a flat tone, "If you have just arrived at the Institute of Combat, please make your way to the left and just keep following the path. If you have been here for more than one occasion, kindly go right. If you have other business, tell me how I can assist." They walked through a long passageway with many closed doors on the side. It took about 5 minutes before the light of day shone through the end of the passage. They exited and came to a broad, open space with thousands of acolytes handling weapons of all types. The walls on the side were like at least 20 feet high, 6.1 meters, with rows of seats higher the farther it went. Julian couldn't help but comment, "Wow, it's like our Colosseum at home, but this one's much bigger and magnificent." On the side was a man with beefy arms, large chest, bald head, but overgrown pointy beard who had taken notice of them. "Hi, fresh blood. Come here." I was about to start me introduction, and ye soft bones just came at the right timing. "Me name is Vico, and I'll be your guide in this stadium." After the quick introduction, Vico pointed with his thumb at the rows of weapons placed behind and proceeded to explain the Institute of Combat with his booming voice to the 1,000 new acolytes. "Since ye all are soft bones lads and gals, I'd like for all to know this institute is open to ye soft bones who want to pursue the art of fighting. Whether you're a close or a ranged magus, ye all still need to learn how to fight with weapons regardless of your ranking. 'Tis would ensure a magus could adapt to the situation in the battlefield or if your spirit capacity runs out. And even though a magus don't need a weapon to fight, at least ye would know how to defend yourself or predict the movements of your enemies that's using a weapon." Vico grabbed a great axe with two sharp edges, and flames suddenly erupted on the edges. You may also use his weapons as a tool to channel your elemental energy. The magi who are experts in tis spells are known as combat magi. Some objects air as well can be used as a catalyst to increase one's spirit power temporarily, such as tis stave. There are many ways and spells one could do with tis weapons, for example, wind coming out of every slash, making the weapon so heavy that it could easily crush flat surfaces, flaming it like tis so it could cut or penetrate even the toughest metal, etc. Tis are the combat magi's secret to our greatness. The flame then disappeared, and Vico placed the great axe back on the rack. "In this Institute of Combat, for now ye will learn how to fight using tis weapons or bare hands." Be sure that ye all saw the display on our front door, right? In case some of you forgot, though, our institute has 10 paths. They are the path of sword, spear, blunt weapon, bow, dagger, shield, axe, firearm, and of course your trusty bare hands. We all welcome ye soft bones acolytes to come here anytime and use our training equipment and places at any time. However, since ye all are soft bones are fresh blood, we only allow ye all to choose just one type of weapon. But once ye are stronger, ye all may learn all weapons we have, and in fact, we encourage ye. Ter all, it'd be best for ye soft bones to learn your enemy's movements. Vico demonstrated some movements using the sword, switching to axe, then wielding a spear. His force was so powerful that the onlookers could feel that the air was heating up with each wave of a weapon. Again, ye all may use and train in any path ye'd like. However, that doesn't mean our institute accept ye as our acolytes. Only those who have talent, endurance, and determination could enter our institute and be taught, unlike the Element Institute. The Combat Institute done not easily accept acolytes as a member of our institute. If ye are accepted, however, ye have the opportunity to learn from one of our famous combat magi. Vico then took the acolytes to another side of the stadium where 5 well-built men, whom Vico had mentioned were combat magi, before saying, "Today, we will accept only 100 from ye all to be our students. Make sure ye are all ready to take the test, cause like in the battlefield, ye only have one life." Vico impaled the spear on the ground and grinned. "Now, ye soft bones, follow me." They made their way to the center of the stadium with a door placed on the ground. Vico said while caressing his pointy beard, "We will contact a test for ye and 'tis divided into two parts. Your ability in using a weapon or bare hands and an obstacle course. He shouted, "Bring it up, boys." From beneath the door, it opened and spawned a large construct made of wood, iron, and other materials that stretched for over 330 feet, 100 meters in length. It was a marvel of mechanical construction in Emery's beaming eyes, who also liked complex creations. "Let me introduce ye to the gauntlet," said Vico with a big smile from ear to ear. He added, "If he can pass this gauntlet to the end, then he passed our first test." The construct cranked and started to come alive. It had at least 100 pikes stabbing from beneath in the side of the walking platform, blades and axes swinging in all directions, spinning mechanisms that had a large bag that would ensure one would fall if got caught, and all other manners of traps placed on the various areas of the course. The first-year acolytes, including Emery and his friends, swallowed hard as the blades, axes, pikes appear to be live weapons. Some acolytes actually even started walking away from the construct, since this gauntlet looked so scary that they couldn't help but think this would be the end of their life. They were first-year acolytes. They weren't willing to waste their lives for this. After all, for most of them, this institute of combat was just an extra skill not as important as the other institutes. Vico simply laughed and didn't care about the acolytes running away. "Ha, of course you won't die from this course. On your first try at least." From the ground behind Vico, hundreds of boxes also spawned out, and Vico pulled out an armor that looked like it was made of thick leather. He threw it to a man on his side. After the assistant finished wearing it, he then proceeded to get on the obstacle, dodged a couple of traps, making his way to the middle, and purposely got hit on one of the swinging blades. He was knocked down from the gauntlet, and some of the acolytes watching closed their eyes from how loud and hard the assistant had hit the ground. The assistant, however, got back up like nothing had happened and took off the thick leather. This protector is one of our basic magic items made by our small craftsmen. It gives you limited protection from attacks, but can only be used fair only once, Vico explained. The first-year acolytes discussed with their friends and didn't appear convinced they could finish this course. There were hundreds of traps after all. Aside from a gauntlet, you can take the other test first if ye'd like, said Vico at the decreasing crowd of acolytes. He snapped his finger, and dozens of small circular fields formed around them. The circle was 33 feet, 10 meters in diameter. In the center was a wooden puppet with hands, legs, and all with the size of the average youth, around 5 feet 4 inches, 163 centimeters in height. "'Tis air is the main training equipment our institute provides to all ye soft bones. Ye all could fight with tis puppets all ye want and learn as much as ye can. If ye manage to defeat the wooden puppets, the better," Vico said. Then a giant cube floated in the middle of the field, and a list of names appeared. 1. Damien, Acolyte Rank 3, Level 6. 2. Tori, Acolyte Rank 3, Level 6. 3. Vita, Acolyte Rank 4, Level 5. 4. Zurue, Acolyte Rank 3, Level 5. 5. Axel, Acolyte Rank 2, Level 5. Despite hundreds had already run away after Vico's demonstrations of the Institute's equipment, there were thousands first-year acolytes names listed in the ranking who had taken wooden puppet combat test in the first 3 days. "'Tis board here is the results of the rankings of those who have fought against the wooden puppets for the first time. Whichever the 2 tests you'd like to take, do what you want. The ranking board, mind ye, is the real kicker in being selected as a disciple for one of the combat magi. They be selecting their disciples till nightfall arrive." "Oh, they seem to be air," said Vico, looking at the 5 men who had just arrived. Most of them were also large people like Vico, except for the one on the furthest left appeared to be slender. Emery watched as the 5 combat magi made their way to the podium located on the side of the stadium. The one who had a slender body seemed to have noticed Emery's stare, and Emery started to feel a heavy pressure bearing down on him before disappearing on the next second. "Hey, you okay, Emery?" Emery twisted his neck to see who it was that spoke and found Shumo looking at him. He asked, "Oh yeah, I'm fine." "Shumo, I hardly heard you speak. Well, how should I say this? Actually, I get too nervous when speaking if there's a woman around, And Clea's. She's scary, Chumo answered, slightly shaking his head. Vico's booming voice drowned out Emery's and Chumo's discussion. The gauntlet and fighting wooden puppets. 'Tis two will be your test for today, and ye all can start whenever ye like. Remaining hundreds of acolytes dispersed and made their way to their preferred test. There were only a few that walked toward the obstacle, and the wooden puppets were the more popular choice. Thrax was cracking his fist and was raring to give the wooden puppets a good beating. All right, action. I'll imagine those Kalios pigs as these wooden puppets and beat them up real good. He entered the circle, and a list of items appeared in front of him, and he unhesitantly chose a spear. The wooden puppet sprang to life, and a wooden spear appeared on both him and the wooden puppet. Thrax got into position with the spear above him, and so did the wooden puppet. A countdown appeared in Thrax's vision. 3, 2, 1, fight. Thrax let out a loud shout as he thrust the spear straight to the wooden puppet's chest. It missed as the wooden puppet jumped to the side, but Thrax was expecting that, and he spun toward the wooden puppet direction and punched it on the face, felling it to the ground, before impaling its chest with the spear. The wooden puppet stopped moving, and a tiny light, like a floating dew, seemed to have exited the wooden puppet's broken body and entered Thrax's chest. Complete Level 1 Combat Puppet. Reward received. Thrax breathed out as his muscles tightened. He checked out his status and said, "Oh wow, my battle power has gone up by 1. The acolytes who had also defeated the wooden puppet also shouted in joy as they looked at their palms after the tiny light, like a floating dew, entered their bodies. Some of them were flexing their muscles, running around with a greater speed, and didn't seem out of breath. Vico had a grin with his crossed beefy arms while watching the new acolytes enjoying their newfound strength. Emery, Julian, and Chumo nodded to each other, all thinking the same thing. They all proceeded to their own circle and faced the wooden puppets. Emery selected a sword, as well as Julian, while Chumo went for a more unconventional weapon, a bow and arrow. Emery gave the sword a few swings to get himself used to it. Surprisingly enough, the moment he slashed, it was lighter than the swords he had been training with. Plus, the way the sword sounded as it cut the air, it was sharper than anything he had held before. Maybe it was safe to assume the battle with the wooden puppet could injure him, since it also used the same weapon. So Emery didn't select start and opted for the option standby, wanting to observe his friends first. Emery watched Chumo's fight against the wooden puppet. Chumo kept on running in a circle as he dodged each arrow the wooden puppet shot. After each dodge shot, Chumo would take the chance to grab an arrow from the quiver on his side, put on a knock and release, hitting the invisible wall behind the wooden puppet. A lot of shots had missed between the two sides, indicative of the 5 arrows left from the 20 arrows Chumo had in the beginning, so he decided to be more aggressive. Chumo grabbed multiple arrows from his quiver and shot it against the wooden puppet. The wooden puppet dodged all of it, but Chumo had run straight to the wooden puppet and punched its head with the last remaining arrow he had. Soon, a tiny orb flew toward Chumo, and he gave a rare smile. Emery missed Julian's battle against the wooden puppet, but based on how Julian didn't seem to have a sweat on him and breathing normally, Julian had an easy time defeating the wooden puppet. In fact, watching Julian may have been a better idea than Chumo, since Emery and Julian were using the same weapon, a one-handed sword. Nevertheless, Emery turned his attention to Thrax, who was shouting Gra and Aho in each blow with the spear. Thrax faced the level 2 wooden puppet. It looked like nothing had changed, at least on the appearance of the wooden puppet, but the way it moved was different. It dodged Thrax's thrust and punches with much ease, even managing to cut Thrax's uniform and making him bleed. Thrax's face was getting more contorted every time he missed, until finally he changed his grip on his spear and turned it as if it was a javelin before throwing it with another Aho. He dashed behind the spear and tackled down the dodging wooden puppet and bashed its face repeatedly until it was broken to pieces. A slightly larger silver orb entered Thrax's body, and he punched the air. All right. A loud cheer erupted as there was another group of acolytes watching Thrax's aggressive fighting style. He stepped out of the circle and sat on the ground, not minding the crowd, instead watching the acolyte adjacent to his circle. Emery also got glued at the acolyte next to Thrax. That acolyte had a large, well-ripped body and was using a greatsword to fight against the level 2 wooden puppet. Clearly, he had a high battle power since the bald acolyte had an athletic body. After all, it was a measure of a person's physical strength and endurance. But when they clashed swords, the wooden puppet did a maneuver, tripping the bald acolyte, and the puppet waved its greatsword before stopping an inch before the bald acolyte's neck. He was defeated. Vico kept his big grin while caressing his overgrown beard with his large, calloused hands. Ha ha ha! Thought ye can defeat 'tis puppet with brute strength, did ye? Try again, Softbone. 'Tis puppet has the same battle power as ye, so ye have to be clever. Treat your battle as if ye were in a real one. Same battle power. So, didn't that mean Emery would have a chance? He gazed at his sword before closing his eyes and gave it a few more swings, trying to remember the only thing he had left of his father. Tightening his grip on the sword, he placed one foot forward before pressing the start with his other hand. 3. The wooden puppet started moving its limbs. 2. A sword, the same as Emery, appeared in the wooden puppet's hand. 1. It shot straight to Emery, but he was expecting it and parried the puppet's sword to the side, leaving the wooden puppet wide open before stabbing straight into the chest. The image of the marauder appeared in Emery's mind, and he suddenly mindlessly charged the impaled wooden puppet against the invisible wall while shouting and smashing it to pieces. The tiny orb appeared. Combat puppet level 1 defeated. Reward 1 battle power. Emery breathed in and breathed out, tried to steady his shaking hands. He didn't notice the tiny orb entering his body, for his pounding heart was all he could feel. His father had always taught him to be calm, especially when wielding the sword, and try not to lose control, and soon everything was clear again. He summoned his status, and indeed confirmed the increase of battle power. And another message. Received swordsmanship technique LVL1. Before Emery got to understand what was going on, information about the swordsmanship movement and techniques filled his mind. Sword plays he had trained before but didn't fully understand was now apparent. When Emery came back to his senses, he swayed the sword a little, eager to try out what he had learned before watching Julian. Julian's style in sword fighting differed in a way that it was more centric in synergizing it with a shield. Julian blocked a lot of the incoming attacks, looking for an opportunity, until an opening finally appeared and he struck down the wooden puppet on the chest. Chumo, on the other hand, still used a bow, an arrow, and a sword was now hanging from his waist. He kept on switching weapons depending on the range between him and the enemy. If Chumo was close to the target, he used the sword. If he was at a distance, then the bow and arrow. Thrax also fought the level 3 parrying with the round shield and spear while still shouting whatever his shenanigans meant. He hadn't used a second weapon on level 2, so level 3 must be tougher for Thrax to use both weapons. He watched Julian once more and paid close to Julian's swordplay. Emery tried to incorporate some of those moves, and once he got used to along with his new understanding, he started the battle with the level 2 wooden puppet. The level 2 puppet's techniques showed its worth. These were the moves Emery had just understood, but he dodged. Most of them, although some cuts made their way through Emery's uniform. In the end, however, he was victorious. He set once to take another rest, and this time it only took him 10 minutes to get his breathing pace back. His status showed him a battle power 8, so he was now at a state where Julian was at before fighting these wooden puppets. It didn't occur to him that if right now was back at their estate, he would be gasping for air, except this time he didn't notice it. After getting a sufficient amount of downtime, Emery had seen Julian and Chumo defeating the level 3 wooden puppet with ease, while Thrax was making a mess on the 4th level. He started the battle with the wooden puppet once more, but this time, the puppet defeated Emery. But Emery wasn't going to give up here, not now when he was finally making some progress. He got back up and tried once more. Emery failed the second time on the 3rd level. Still, he wasn't done. Once more, wiping off the dust and sweat accumulating on his face, Emery tried and tried until finally he was spent. He laid on the ground, drenched from head to toe. That big grin, however, it was worth it. His battle power was now 11 and level 4 was available. Emery sat up, watching the others. Like him, there were a lot of acolytes who stopped on wooden puppet level 3. There were only a few people battling the level 4. Julian and Shumo sat beside him, while Thrax was still attempting to break through the level 4 wooden puppet. The two hadn't defeated level 4 yet, so like Emery, they were also taking a rest. If level 3 was achievable by a lot of people, then level 4 would be like the line between those talented and weren't. That barbarian, look at him go. It looks like he can go on for hundreds of rounds. I guess he'll make a decent entertainer, said Julian, taking a sip of water from a crystal ball attendant in the stadium. What do you mean? Asked Emery. Ha. You'll see when you visit my home. Anyway, let's check out this gauntlet first. Emery and Shumo agreed, leaving Thrax behind battling the level 4 puppet with a menacing look as if a madman. The construct wasn't far away since it was located in the center of the stadium. Its rhythmic clanking, whooshing of the spinning wheel, and slashing blades swinging from side to side brought goosebumps to Emery, but at the same time, his eyes couldn't help but beam. He had yearned to create something akin to this. Well, not this complicated, however, but something simpler like the box he had made for Gwen. Shaking off his thoughts of her, Emery returned to observe the mechanical wonder. The whole obstacle course was divided into 3 parts. First were the alternating platforms on each side with space in between where one would have to jump to get to the rope waiting on the other side and land below a tall wall, which would have to be climbed. The second part in the middle was where it became a little tricky. It was filled with moving obstacles made of iron and wood that were always spinning and ready to knock down every acolyte that passed. The biggest challenge, though, lay in the third part of the obstacle course. It was a long, straight platform, about 164 feet, 50 meters, in length, and this was where those sharp, swinging blades cutting the air were stationed. There were thousands of acolytes training in this stadium, new and higher-ranking magus alike, but it was clear most of them favored the benefits of fighting the wooden acolytes. Thrax just arrived after defeating the level 4 wooden puppet, drenched with sweat. "Hey guys, that thing looks interesting," Thrax said. His pacing was still normal. "You're still raring to go?" asked Emery. "Yeah, I'm on fire," Thrax said as he made his way first on the obstacle. Thrax went first and finished all 3 hurdles without a hiccup. Whether he was just that athletic and talented or not, the fact was that he finished it while making it look easy encouraged the other 3 to give it a try. Julian and Shumo gave it a go and got up on the obstacle course, while Emery held back once more. The 2 got past the obstacle course's first part, however, didn't manage to get past the spinning traps and were knocked off the ground on the second part. Emery tried to compare the 3 attempts just now and made a mental image of how he should attempt it. He couldn't do it like Thrax. Emery was sure he didn't have the fast reaction Thrax had. When Emery finished devising his plan, he wore the protective armor and got on the first platform. It didn't look high when he had watched his 3 friends running the course from below, but it surely affected Emery's leg as it became noodly at the thought of falling, especially feet first. The protective armor also negated damage on the legs, right? He stomped his feet, trying to straighten it and get his mind off of it. That helped a little, as well as trying not to look down, instead setting his eyes on the alternating platforms. He ran and grabbed each one like a cat, trying to do a wall jump. Making it to the rope, he swung himself with just enough force to get to the other side. Now he faced the tall wall that towered over him. There was no time limit, and he needed to catch his breath. After lightly hopping, he placed 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, and dashed with all the strength in his leg and reached for the high wall. Just an inch left, and he would have reached it. He tried once more, and this time, he waved his arms at the moment he jumped and reached the corner of the wall with just the tip of his fingers on one hand. It was slipping off, but with gritted teeth he managed to grab with his dangling arm the edge and pulled himself up with his arms shaking terribly after. Emery crouched, that feeling of wanting to puke, blurring vision, heart pounding against the chest up to his ears. All he was too familiar with was starting again. He shook his head, as if that would help his situation. Straightening his back, he was still gasping for air, but at least his mind and vision was clearing again. Emery made his way on the second part, and the spinning mechanical wheels inside clicked and clanked. He so wanted to pick apart these things and learn how they work, but this wasn't the time. These contraptions moved at a steady pace. As long as he could anticipate the right timing, he should be fine. Focusing his ears on the cranking and the eyes on the bag strapped on the spinning wheel, he understood he had to aim for the gap before the next bag arrived. Emery got into position, watching closely. The gap appeared, and he dashed. It seemed his years of study about architectural construction with the family scholar paid off. He counted the timing, and step by step, he managed to pass the second part of the gauntlet. Finally, he arrived at the third part. The hundreds of axes and blades swung, cutting the air around themselves. This time, the sharp object in front of him made his heart beat faster. No normal 15-year-old kid wouldn't be worried seeing what was in front of him right now. Emery took deep breaths and did the same thing he did in the second part. "I can do this," he muttered to himself. One step, 3 steps in, it was going well so far, and his confidence boosted when suddenly, bam! An axe slammed Emery back to where he was standing. He rolled on the platform as he hit his head, almost falling 33 feet, 10 meters from the ground. Without the protector, he would be cut in half, but even so the hit was heavy enough that he felt a little headache. He was somehow fortunate enough not to fall, but now the protector's function wore off, he was unsure what to do. "Get down or you'll die," Julian shouted on the ground. "Kid, you don't have to push yourself." Emery heard the shouting coming from below. However, his mind still set on the hurdle in front of him. Whether it was because of the headache or his ignorance, he dulled his ears. His trembling feet reminded him of the time his father died in front of him. If he decided to walk away now, then he would still be the same boy that ran from his father's murderers. A version of him that he was starting to hate. A cowardly, weak version of him. For some reason, his father's words of not losing control kept running in his mind. What would happen if he didn't keep calm? He had made it this far by keeping collected. Maybe like Thrax, he had to be more aggressive to finish this obstacle course. Unconsciously, he was gritting his teeth as the blood throughout his whole body boiled. The clanking became louder in his mind, and when a blade appeared, he shot forward, and the spinning blade missed Emery by a hair's breadth, repeating the same maneuver every mechanism he had faced. His heart was racing, his awareness heightened. This was the first time he had felt like this, as if something inside him was unleashed. The hundreds of axes and blades swung, cutting the air around themselves. One hit, for sure he would die. The sharpness of the weapon rang clearer in Emery's ear, but the way it moved felt weird. It looked like they were moving slower than he remembered. In the eyes of the others, they saw a crazy kid run without hesitation straight through the hundreds of weapons. As for Emery, however, he seemed to start losing himself. He moved reactively dodging and dashing at all the blades to swing in front of him. Third obstacle complete. He managed to pass the gauntlet, leaving his 3 friends and many others in awe. The weak-looking mad kid passed through the gauntlet without the protective vest. Emery stood there outside the gauntlet, unmoving. And then darkness. Emery lost consciousness. Chumo was the first to arrive on the scene and checked Emery's breathing. The breath was hot, and when Chumo touched Emery's forehead, it felt like a fever was acting up. Julian, Chumo, and Thrax were preoccupied with Emery when the giant cube floating in the middle updated its ranking. 67. Thrax Acolyte rank 2. Level 5. 101. Emery Acolyte rank 1. Level 3. At the end of the day, Emery didn't make the cut, but unbeknownst to him, the slender combat Magus took an interest in.